Hello, everybody. This is Vince Russo, and I am here with a familiar face, somebody that I've had one conversation with. I hope to get to meet one day because I think this man is absolutely phenomenal. This is Mike Williams. Mike Williams has a podcast and a website, Sage of Quay, which also goes hand in hand with a channel, a Paul is Dead channel, talking about the death of Paul McCartney going back to 1966, the replacement of Billy Shears. We're going to get into a lot of that. Mike, how you doing, my friend?
Doing well, Vince. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been a while since we spoke because it took me a while to get this last presentation done.
Yeah, Mike, I was keeping track. I was going to the website. I was watching all the podcasts, and you kept moving the date back because I have a good feel for you. I kept saying to myself, man, this is going to be incredible. And he's going to do it. There was never a question in my mind, but I also knew you were going to leave no stone unturned.
No, I was going to do it. I made a commitment, and I keep to my commitments. It's just that for anybody who watches the presentation, they can now see that the amount of information that I had to plow through and vet and connect the dots on was enormous. So it took a long time to go through that, especially when you have other stuff to do in life, like you have a job and a family and everything else. So, but I would say the last 4 to 5 weeks, I was pretty much heads down. So any free time I had, I was just focused on getting it out because I didn't want to delay it anymore.
Got off your presentation, 4.5 hours. I watched it over 4 days because I wanted to take everything in. I took notes. Saturday, obviously, we all have to find things to do at this current time. So I have all the Beatles films on DVD. So the first thing I said is, I'm going to watch Help. Help has always been one of my favorite Beatle movies. I think that's my favorite movie because of the music. Help and Rubber Soul are my 2 favorite Beatle albums. So now I'm listening to your report and I'm hearing about, really during the filming of Help, there was a lot of marijuana involved, a lot of the usage of drugs for the first time with the Beatles. So I was like, let me watch Help. Let me see how these guys appear. Let me see if they, appear under the influence. Okay. So I sat there, I watched Help. Mike, then I had sitting on my shelf, I have never watched this before. I had the Magical Mystery Tour. And I said, I am finally going to put on the Magical Mystery Tour. Mike, I put on the Magical Mystery Tour, and all I'm thinking about is Mike Williams is not going anywhere. Mike, you could probably spend 5 years picking that movie alone apart because I sat there and I watched Magical Mystery Tour. Not a lot is said about that film.
Yeah.
But when that film is complete, I'm sitting there knowing, man, there was a lot of shit in that movie that I did not get. And I've not heard you talk about that film much. Can you give me your little insights? Because, man, I watched that from start to finish, and I don't know what I experienced.
Yeah, well, Magical Mystery Tour is all occulted. It has the 9/11 encoded in it, and that was the brainchild of Billy. So Billy was the one that put it together. And, and Billy is an occultist, plain and simple. He's heavily into the occult, into magic and so on. So Magical Mystery Tour is filled with all kinds of symbolism. I Am the Eggman is really a play on Humpty Dumpty. Fell off the wall, right? And they couldn't put him back together again, right? That's a Paul is Dead clue. I wish I had my cheat sheet in front of me right now, but I would be able to take you through more of the occult that's embedded in Magical Mystery Tour. But rest assured that it's completely occulted, the whole thing. When it came out, it got trashed because the average person, really didn't understand what it was all about because it is this crazy mixed bag of stuff, right? But what Billy did with that movie was that it was really filled with occultism. And for people who understand the occult, they would get very clearly what it is that the film was depicting. And for those that don't understand, the way this works in the occult and magic is if you focus on it and you watch it and pay attention to it, in the occult, your focus, your consciousness focused on something gives their magic power. Mm-hmm. And they believe that enables them to be able to manifest whatever it is their objectives or their goals are. If you understand the occult, you know exactly what they're doing and saying and why. If you don't, it doesn't matter anyway, because they're basically usurping your energy, your conscious energy and your thoughts, and manipulating it so that they can manifest what it is that they want.
Mike, I learned something else, man. I was doing a little research when I wanted to come out. It makes me laugh because when I used to work for Vince McMahon, Mike, my whole thing was I got down to the point where, I was going to write the perfect wrestling television show, and he wasn't going to be able to poke one hole in it. So now as I'm doing this research, I'm getting excited because I'm saying to myself, on one hand, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to find something that Mike has not found. But then I know I'm going to hit Mike with something and he's going to shoot it back to me verbatim because he has gone through everything. But again, today, I'm doing some research and I want to ask you this, Thomas Hugh Harriet.
Yeah.
Is that his real Twitter account?
Yeah.
Okay, now I was going through his Twitter account and he mentions you on there frequently. And I came across just the clip today about Billy writing backwards. Mm-hmm. And then the clip in the book about being mentored by Aleister Crowley. And I was like, I missed that the first time around. But again, he's openly saying that. And like you said, with Magical Mystery Tour, if I know the occult, I understand that movie. When Billy is openly saying that, you understand exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, it's the occult law of reversal. And in Memoirs, Billy tells us in the blue version that he was mentored by Aleister Crowley in his early years. So yes, so everything is out there, Vince. I mean, it's hidden in plain sight. And as I've said so many times, Billy has been dropping clues since day one. When people say, "Oh, Billy's a liar, he's a deceiver," well, he's only a liar and a deceiver if you don't understand the signs and symbols and what it is that he's putting out there. It's like Brian Ray, who's his current guitar player. I put a video up maybe about a week ago or so, and he was being interviewed. He had said that he's the best Paul McCartney ever, or something to that effect. Watching that, and you're listening to it, and the average person, it goes over their head. But once you understand about masterful speaking, where they could tell you the truth, but they encode it, the first question you ask yourself is, he's the best Paul McCartney ever. Well, isn't there only one Paul McCartney? So that's a very strange thing to say, right? Yeah. So it's stuff like that. It's not always going to hit you over the head and be extremely obvious. It's a lot of it's nuanced. And so you have to learn how to decode the nuances of what's being said and what's being shown. The interesting thing is with Tom, before I actually released the presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music, Tom had PM'd me right before I was going to release it. And I wasn't going to share it with anybody preview-wise. I did share it with you because we were going to do this show, but I was going to just kind of keep it under wraps until it premiered. And Tom said to me, I'm working on an update to the abridged version of Memoirs the book is called Billy's Back. So evidently Billy sent the word down that he wants the book updated, and it's supposed to come out the summer of this year. So within the next few months or so. And Tom said to me that Billy is going to lean into the Lennon-McCartney songwriting myth, that it is not what we have been told or what most people, virtually everybody, believes. So when Tom said that, I wrote him back and I said, well, then you might be interested in my presentation. And I sent him the link. And he wrote me back after watching it, and he said, Mike, this is going to speed up disclosure. So this is going to really kick it into high gear. I didn't get, oh no, this is a problem, right? It was, okay, this is a good thing. And just so that everybody knows, I don't work with Tom. Tom and I have become acquaintances over the last 4 years because I've been engrossed in this for 4 years. But Tom and I do not share what I'm doing and what he's doing. Like he might say to me he's updating the book, but I have no idea what he's putting in the book. He knew I was doing a presentation that had to do with assessing whether the Beatles wrote their own music. But I didn't go back and report back to Tom and tell him what's in the presentation. He just knew I was doing that, So it's kind of interesting how it all kind of comes together and aligns at the end of the day. So for the folks that are going to be interested in watching my last presentation, just know that within the next couple of months or so, Billy, via Tom, and Billy's the guy that's playing Paul McCartney, is going to let some of the cat out of the bag himself. So this whole process of disclosure is well underway. And it's kind of interesting, Vince, with everything else going on in the world. I think it's a time when people really are being deluged with information and examples of the illusionary nature of the reality that people think is real.
Mike, I want to ask you, I'm going to turn to my other computer here because, I was looking into Tom a little bit today, and there was something I want you to clarify for me. And Tom was like answering like the top 12 questions or whatever, about the memoirs.
Yeah.
Okay, this was one thing I read. I want you to clarify this for me. The question was, did you, Harriet, really plan this book with Paul McCartney when they met at a beach in Southern California? And he answers, you, Harriet, who was only 7 years old when Paul died in 1966, never met Paul. The story about you, Harriet, meeting William as Paul on a Southern California beach one hot day after Paul left the recording studio in Los Angeles is merely a legend that was invented in chapter 35, which is fictional, to explain this book. In chapter 35, if chapter 35 were historically accurate, that disclosure to you, Harriet, would have constituted a breach of William's non-disclosure agreement, which William would never do. Hence, everyone can be certain that that chance meeting never occurred. Is you, Harriet, telling us here that he never met Billy?
He's saying that the decision and the discussion to do the book did not take place where they said a beach, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
That didn't happen. That's fiction. So they openly admit that that's a fictional aspect of the book. Now, I will explain how I believe it worked. The Masonic structure is just like a corporation. It's a pyramid, right? So if you work for Exxon or any large corporation, you have your CEO, president at the top, and then it just branches down. So what happens is, think of Billy as having his own pyramid and his own enterprise, if you will. When it came time for Billy to disclose, he then went out and looked throughout his corporate structure, if you will, his pyramid, for the people that had the right skills and resources to do the work. Tom is a Freemason. Billy, at this time, is in what I refer to as the illuminated degrees. In other words, he's above the 33rd degree of Freemasonry. So the way it works is you have the 33 degrees of Freemasonry, then you have 13 degrees of the Illuminati, and above that, there are 20 degrees that are just basically unknown. They're in the shadows. These are people and beings we will never know about. So when it came time to put the book together, they went out and they tapped into their network. And what Tom did tell me in an email going back a while ago is that he was specifically trained to do encoding. And he explained to me that at the time when it was happening, now I don't know when it took place. I'm assuming it took place when he was younger, when he was a kid. That when he was going through this training, he had no idea what it was for. And this is how it works. So how it works is all of this stuff that they do, when I say they, we're talking about the pyramid of power, the Freemasonic structure, the Illuminati. Everything is planned years and years and years in advance. So they nurture and groom people along the way. Many times, these people don't even know that they're being groomed and brought along. And then it reaches a point where their skills are honed, and these skills can now be used to do whatever. In Tom's case, it was to encode the book. And the work that it took for Tom to encode that book is mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. Absolutely mind-boggling. And whenever he has to do an update, like he had to update the Memoirs of Billy Shears from the first edition, which is dated 2009, to the Blue Book, the second edition, which was 2018, he had to make sure that all of the pages, all of the encoding stayed in place with updates. I can't even imagine what it was like to sit there and have to put that all together and keep that encoding intact. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. So that depiction of how they met is fictional. Now, I've asked Tom if he's actually met Billy, and Tom told me that, he can't answer that question.
Okay.
And that's because, Tom has signed non-disclosures as well and confidentiality agreements. It's not just Billy who's bound by contractual obligations. Tom has them as well, as did the Beatles, by the way.
Mike, if you know that he hasn't met Billy, would your feelings still be as strong as they are now?
Yeah, it would be, because, I can give you two scenarios. The one scenario would be that he has met Billy and he has conversed with him one-on-one. It could be telephone, maybe in person, through email. So direct communication with Billy. I personally believe that, yes, he has. I personally believe that he has had direct communication and contact with Billy. Now, whether it was in person, I don't know. But through, like I said, electronic means, telephone, email, stuff like that, yes. But now, the other way it could work is, it's like in a corporation. When I used to work in a corporation, I never met or spoke to our CEO, ever. But our CEO would cascade down a strategy that had to be implemented, that the corporation had to work on. And so people would convene and converge, and they would then bring this strategy or this vision, they would make it a reality, right? They bring products to market and so on. Now, does that mean that because I never actually met my CEO, that the product that we put out or the deliverables that we put out, that somehow it wasn't really what the CEO or the president of the corporation wanted? No, doesn't mean that at all, because there is a hierarchy and there is a chain of command. And it's no different when you're dealing with Freemasonry and the pyramid and with Billy. But my own personal take is, I do believe that Tom has been in direct communication with Billy. And that's just my take on it. I don't know for sure.
Okay, Mike, I want to ask you a question. You kind of just went by this because the presentation, again, like I said, guys, 4.5 hours. This was a life's work. Mike, seriously, the detail and the information in this is just absolutely incredible. However, you did make a comment which you really didn't get into, where, when we talk about Tavistock and we talk about that's where it all began and what the Beatles were created to do, you made the comment that you think this went well beyond before the Cavern, before Hamburg, before Epstein managed. You almost went back to their teens.
Yeah.
What brings you to that theory?
Yeah, and I intentionally did not dive into that in that presentation, Vince, because it is a theory and it is one that a lot of people would have a very difficult time getting their heads wrapped around. And so what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to cloud the presentation with that. Okay. But I suspect that based upon what I've looked at, that it is very possible that it goes back to when they were kids. So what Vince is referring to is, I had said that the Beatles were always on the radar and they were being groomed from very early ages. And I said that I believe it was possible that it started at least when they were back in Hamburg in Germany in the very early 1960s. But I do believe it goes before that, when they were teenagers and maybe even when they were kids. And the reason why I say that, Vince, is because all these gigs they were doing, they were playing nonstop, 7 hours a night. I showed in the presentation, it was like, 2/3 of the year they were just grinding it out. And you're doing it with very little to no pay. You're living in conditions, like especially in Germany, that were just deplorable. All of them sitting in a single room, sleeping at night, and so on. It's because they were groomed. They were brought along from a very early age. Now, there are pictures out there, and I put it in the presentation. It was kind of my way of a little bit of a wink and a nod to people who were in the know, of Paul McCartney with a bird cage over his head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So in Illuminati symbolism, whenever you see a bird cage represents mind control. And you see this a lot. You'll see this a lot with celebrities, actors, and musicians, and so on. If you look at the web and you look up pictures, you're going to see them near bird cages with the bird cage on their head. This is telling us that they are in a mind control program. And so when I came across the picture of Paul McCartney, biological Paul McCartney, with the bird cage, like his head in the bird cage,
mm-hmm.
and I believe there's also one with George Harrison, the bird cage too, on his head. So that raised an eyebrow, and I became suspicious. I said, well, you know what? I think what we're being shown here and what we're being told is that they were subjected to trauma-based mind control. Trauma-based mind control doesn't take place when you're older. They have to basically break everything down early on in your life. So people would then say, well, does that mean that their parents were involved in this? I'm not going to go there because I don't want to accuse anybody of anything. All I'm going to say is that if they were in a mind control program at an early age, people had to know they were in these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, trauma-based mind control programs doesn't necessarily mean that everything is bad and evil. There are positive aspects of trauma-based mind control. In other words, there's a reward system. There are both negative and positive applications of it. As an example, let's just say there's a young boy that plays football, and his father is a big-time football coach, and he's coaching the team. His son's on it. And let's just say that he's grooming his son to be a star. We've seen this so many times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say his son is a running back, and then he fumbles the ball. After the game, what does the father do? In a lot of cases, what happens is the father becomes irate. How could you have done this? You broke your focus. Get down, do 500 push-ups, get your head back together. This can't happen again. That's trauma-based mind control. That child, their mind is being shaped at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if that same kid in the next game actually runs 90 yards and scores a touchdown, the father's application at that point is to rain praise on his child. Pat him on the back. Let's go out to dinner, son. You did a wonderful job. Mm-hmm. You're head and shoulders above everybody else. That's the positive aspect of a trauma-based mind control program. So there's two sides of the coin, if you will. So Billy tells us in the memoirs of Billy Shears that he was in a mind control program, a trauma-based mind control program. I mean, that's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That's not up for debate. I mean, that's in the book. It's one of the longer footnotes that Tom put in there. And although it doesn't say anything about biological Paul or any of the other Beatles having been in any of these types of programs, when I see birdcage symbolism, that makes me very suspicious.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't go into it in the presentation, Vince, because it would have been just over the head of too many people. They just would, what is this guy talking about?
Mike, I want to ask you another question because I'm just curious if these roads intersect, because I've not really seen you go into this. And perhaps you have, and I just missed it. I've been watching a lot on Pete Best lately. And, from what I'm understanding, Pete Best was really maybe the most popular Beatle.
Yeah.
He had a following. They loved him. He was very, very popular. Out of nowhere, Pete Best was replaced.
Yeah.
And Pete Best, when you see some of the interviews, he comes out and he says he thinks it was because of jealousy, because there was more attention on him than the other people. Do those roads intersect? Was that a part of Tavistock, do you believe, or was that just a band outing a drummer?
Yeah, so we have to, there were 3 phases to the Beatles, so we have to start there. Phase 1 of the Beatles was the Beatles with Stu Sutcliffe and Pete Best. This was the early Beatles back in Hamburg and all that stuff, right? Then we had phase 2 of the Beatles. This was the Ringo Starr period where we had John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And this was the period or the phase where they were recording and playing live, doing tours and concerts and live gigs. Phase 3 was the Billy era, Sgt. Pepper on. Now, the thing with Pete Best is if we want I think the truest story, it is in Memoirs on page 350, where Billy explains that Pete was replaced because George Martin didn't think much of him as a drummer. And so I think what they were looking at that point was not so much recording, because I guess we'll get into that in a little bit. George Martin was thinking in terms of playing live. So what I took from that was Pete didn't have the chops to do the live stuff. Ringo did. So what I'm saying is that George Martin determined that Ringo was a better drummer than Pete for what they needed to do next, which was to play these concerts through 1966. So if you're playing in small clubs and bars and stuff like that, Pete was okay. But once we stepped it up and we got out of bars and clubs and we got to concerts, then they had Ringo as the drummer. But as I've said in my presentation, that's where kind of like the road ended for him. In those early albums from Please Please Me, released in 1963 through Revolver in August of 1966, Ringo didn't play on those albums. Those were studio drummers that were playing on those albums. Probably a shock to a lot of people who haven't watched the presentation. So to answer your question, I believe Pete was ousted because I'm going to take Memoirs at its word. It's because George Martin, who was the primary player, the protagonist in this whole thing,
yes,
decided he wasn't the guy.
Let's talk about George Martin for a second, because here's one thing that I'm a little confused about. When you start off your presentation, we hear about Brian Epstein and the meeting with George Martin and the introduction of the Beatles. Okay. Yeah. George Martin pulls no punches. And he says on several occasions, like, they were not very good. And again, I think a lot of people know this, but we got to go back to the Cavern and the early days. They were a cover band.
Right.
They were a cover band, but there were so many instances and interviews that you pulled out early on where he basically said he saw nothing in them, that it kind of felt like they had charisma and right. They fit the bill. Almost like, we could look at today, we could look at NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and all those boy bands,
Or the Monkees.
The Monkees, yeah. It sounded like he was saying they had the charisma. Maybe they had the it factor, but on a musical level, they were lousy. And the words are coming from his mouth. But then we fast forward to the Rubber Soul and the success. And I love the one clip you have. Explain to everybody what the finger over the mouth means, because you could explain that much better than me.
Okay, so in Freemasonry, they have this symbolism. So when you see a Freemason place their forefinger or their index finger to their lips, that's the symbol for tell no secrets. And so there was an interview that was in a DVD, which was about George Martin. It's called Produced by George Martin. And I watched that DVD, And so he was being interviewed by Howard Goodall. And Howard is a composer himself. He's a broadcaster and composer. He's very accomplished. And so Mr. Goodall, during that interview, was asking George some questions. And then he says, I have to ask you this one question. And so George Martin says, okay, yeah, no problem. And so Mr. Goodall starts asking about the composition and the complexities of songs like Yesterday, Eleanor Rigby, Blackbird. And it's interesting. If you watch that clip closely, it's as if when Mr. Goodall asked George Martin that question, I don't think George Martin was expecting that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you notice, Vince, he straightens up in his chair. You know, George is sitting there. Howard asks him the question, and then George straightens up. And it's almost like, whoa. And the problem with Mr. Goodall asking that question is because he's a composer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's a formally trained musician and composer. And so when that comes from a peer and they're asking that question, that's questioning the official narrative. And so when Mr. Goodall was playing giving some examples of how the songs were constructed, remember he was playing the piano, giving some brief examples, George does this. So he's listening to Mr. Goodall, and he still has his finger up like this. And then once Mr. Goodall finishes explaining it, getting through his question and giving his examples on the piano, George then does what he does best, which is he directs the conversation, the answer back to John and Paul. He says, oh no, they wrote it. They really did. They really did. And if I had wrote them, I would have made, a lot of money. And then I jumped at the clip where George Martin then says he wrote the melody line to Michelle. He says that was his composition. So when that happened, again, it's when you're able to decode the signs and symbols, and you don't have to know all of them, just the basic ones. Whenever you see this, that just means, we're going to keep silent, keep quiet. We're not going to reveal any secrets. When he did that during that particular segment of the presentation, when Mr. Goodall was asking him the question about those songs, that immediately said to me that the Beatles, John and Paul specifically, did not write those songs. And that's how I interpreted it.
I mean, why would he then early on pull no punches about them not being good musicians? And I mean, wouldn't from the get-go he build these guys up to be more than they actually were?
Yeah, so I think what happened was, and again, this is just a guess because it is kind of weird. In the beginning, he's telling us that he didn't like the music. Mm-hmm. He said he thought the music was rubbish.
Yep.
His words, right?
Yep.
That they didn't have much behind them. No, he said none of them stands above the others. Basically what he's saying is I've got an equal lot of 4 guys here, and what do I do with them? And then he said, I'll just take them on as a band. So I think what happened, and again, this is just me kind of reading into it. I think initially when the Beatles were presented to him, George didn't want anything to do with them. George is an accomplished musician, arranger, composer, and he's thinking, what am I going to do with this?
Mm-hmm.
And Tavistock had a whole pool of these bands around, and what they do is they have a pool of resource that they pull from. The Rolling Stones came from the same pool, by the way. The Stones are also a creation of Tavistock, as is the Who and the rest of them. I think what happened was people above George Martin said, okay, look, that's interesting that you don't like them, George, but they're the guys.
They're the chosen ones.
They're the ones that we're going to push forward with, okay? So I can appreciate the fact that this is going to be a lot of work on your part.
Right.
Right? but you have to go do this.
Yeah.
And because even in the book, I think it was on page 351 of Memoirs, Billy mentions that the word came from a couple of rungs above George Martin.
Yeah.
So even though Memoirs does not specifically question who wrote the music, there are little clues hidden inside Memoirs that will help you to validate what I did as an example.
Yeah.
Right? It's neither denying or confirming in Memoirs.
Yeah.
But once you kind of grab onto a specific thread and you follow it, you find that, oh, you know what? I think perhaps this is what I'm being told in the book. Because people like to think that they're all rowing in the same direction, It's not the case. It's like even the way it is in business. You might have disagreements amongst various vice presidents or executives within a corporation, and I don't think we should go there. The other guy thinks you should. And then what happens is from a layer above or 2 layers above, they'll say, okay, Discussion's over. This is where we're going.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So I believe the same thing happened there.
Yeah. Let's talk. I want to talk Smoking Gun. Now, to me, and I'm curious to hear your answer to this, Mike. To me, doing all the research, reading the You Harriet book, I mean, everything I've been seeing since I'm a 7-year-old kid, to me, the smoking gun in the Paul is dead theory. The smoking gun to me is the arrest in Japan.
Yeah.
And the fingerprints not matching up. And Billy thought, gigs up, man, like gigs up. That to me is the smoking gun here, like clearly. And I want you to, go into this. The Mercy Beat article in 1962.
That's a smoking gun.
If this happened in 1962, what would make you think it didn't happen in 63, in 64, in 65, and 66? Listen, Mike, you and I both listen to a lot of music. You are a musician. You listen to a lot more than me. But I could tell you in my whole life of listening to music, even before you put together this unbelievable presentation, there is not one musical group out there, not one, that literally changed their style year after year after year after year, like they were 2, 3, 4 totally different bands. Not one. Zeppelin sounded like Zeppelin. Who sounded like who? Stones still sound like the Stones. Pink Floyd, Simon and Garfunkel. I'm a writer. There is a way I write. When I write something, it's Vince Russo. This was completely different from the early albums. Please, Please Me. Then we went into the Help Brothers Soul Revolver stage. Then all of a sudden, Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour. Then we go to the White Album. Like, to think this is the same style of these same 4 individuals, there's no way, no how. But talk about that smoking gun in 1962 where we're told.
Yeah, so in the presentation, and I can't, I'll give credit to one of my friends who sent this to me. I won't mention them by name because some folks don't want me to mention their names, but they sent me this clip, an image of a Mercy Beat publication from, I think it was August, September of 1962. Mm-hmm. And in it was an article about the Beatles, and it was an article announcing that Pete Best left the group and Ringo Starr was the new drummer, and the Beatles were flying to London to record with EMI, and that the songs were specifically written for them and given to them by their producer, George Martin. It doesn't say that they wrote their own songs. It said that the songs were specifically written for them. And this goes back to 1962, right before they headed in to go record their first album, Please Please Me. So, and actually even before that, because Please Please Me was released in 1963. So that article was unbelievable. When it was shown to me, I read that. I said to myself, okay, well, how are you going to get around this? Mm-hmm. You can't. You just can't. There was a lot of information that I received, Vince, that I presented throughout the presentation that maybe not as black and white as that, were situations or circumstances that we're told in the official narrative that once you really analyze it, it's not possible.
Yeah, then you go through, I mean, we talk about a lot of plagiarism and a lot of their songs sounding like popular songs that were already out there. It almost seemed, I mean, Mike, do you think it seems to me after watching your presentation, there were many writers, and those writers changed over time according to the time. Was that your takeaway?
Yeah, I believe that from 62 to 66, they had a core group of writers that were writing for them. And, there were times when they lifted riffs from other songs. And I have this in the presentation, and if you watch the presentation, I give the examples. And it's possible that they did that because they were able to get away with it. You just change up the lyrics a little bit, or maybe just change the melody line a little bit, and there you go. I mean, like I said, if you watch the presentation, I give examples of this stuff. But one of our team members, and again, I won't give out any names, but is a very accomplished composer and arranger. And he analyzed the music, and he had said that even within the 1962 through 66 period, if we go back to like 1965 and 1966, where we have Revolver and it was in 66 and Rubber Soul in 1965, that there are stylistic differences in the music there for songs that are credited to Paul McCartney. So what this team member was saying is these are quote unquote McCartney songs, but he was able to detect clear differences in style in writing of those songs. So I believe that there was a core group of writers that were involved in that period. I don't know how many. People have asked me, oh, Mike, do you know the names of any of these people? No, I don't know the names of any of these people. These people are going to be uncredited unless somebody steps forward. Somebody like Bernard Purdy, who didn't write songs, but he stepped forward and back in the 1970s and said that he was hired to drum on 21 Beatles songs on the early records, on the early albums. Mm-hmm. So until we get more people to step forward like that, it's not going to be possible to figure out who these folks are. I have been given some names by people who say that they know people who claim that they were ghost writers for the Beatles, but I didn't put that into the presentation because I had no way to validate that. I had no way to verify it. I wasn't going to put somebody's name out there because somebody else told me that they believe this person was involved in that process. And then we can see, like you said, Vince, then the songwriting changes it's very, very different starting with Sgt. Pepper. Mm-hmm. So there was a different kludge of songwriters starting with Pepper. And I believe what happened there was, Billy was clearly the driver behind the Beatles when he took over the band in late 1966. And I think Billy then recruited people that he knew. Yeah. That, some of the names that I've heard, popular names that were potentially in that songwriting kludge or that stream were Harry Nilsson, Neil Innes from the Ruddles.
Lennon and Harry Nilsson were very, very tight.
Yeah, Neil Innes from the Ruddles. Now, because Neil wrote a lot of the Ruddles, the Ruddle and the Bonzo Dog Band. He was in the Bonzos with Billy, right? Now, I don't know whether Harry wrote the songs or whether Neil wrote those songs, but these are some of the names that have floated out there that are recognizable. Junior Campbell is another name that's popped up, but who knows? I don't know. But the songwriting is very different, starting with Pepper, when you compare it to the pre-Pepper era, 62 to 66. Very, very different songwriting.
Now, Mike, you also make this statement. I'm curious to hear your take on this. If this were an opinion or again, this was something out of memoirs, but you also believe that Billy was behind the scenes prior to 67. Yeah. Billy could have been working on some of this music prior to Pepper. What brings you to that thought?
Well, there was an article that came out about a year ago or so, and where Billy said that he wrote the music to In My Life, which is a song on Rubber Soul. Mm-hmm. Billy came out and said, no, I wrote the melody, the music, and John wrote the lyrics. Now, this is a very perplexing thing. So what happened was the mainstream media at that point went into damage control, and so they said they ran computer models because these computer models were able to pick up the styles of each individual Beatle. And they said, no, they know him as Paul McCartney, right? They call him Paul McCartney. They said, no, he just misremembered. In my presentation, I said the probability that he would misremember writing a song like In My Life when it's one of the most famous Beatles songs of all time. I think Rolling Stone had its 100 greatest Beatles songs, and In My Life was number 5. Yeah. And any kind of music poll of greatest songs of all time in rock, In My Life ranks very, very high. There's no way Billy misremembered that. There's no way. So if we know Billy, right, we understand Billy, he likes to drop clues. This is what he does. And so I think what Billy was doing was he was saying, yeah, that was my song. I wrote the music to it, which means he was there before he was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Which actually, Vince, when you think about it, would make sense because it would make the assimilation of Billy into the band a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he was already working with him. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to start working with George Martin now in the creation of Sgt. Pepper. I don't think that's the case at all anymore. I really do believe that Billy was there, and I believe he was there starting in 1965. It's very possible we're hearing his influences on the Help album and Rubber Soul.
Yeah, it's funny, Mike, that you mentioned that because it's a little sketchy. This is where you go from the fiction to the nonfiction. Again, in the You Harriet book was when 5 days after biological Paul was killed, I believe it was in Paris.
Yeah.
That, and it was Epstein. It was Epstein, right?
It was in France. Yeah. He met Epstein there to talk to John.
But isn't that where Epstein introduced him to Billy?
That's what the book says, that Epstein and Billy showed up and they were going to meet with John. And that's where Billy said that he had his criteria, right? And one of the criteria of doing this was that he had full creative control of the Beatles
Right.
from that point going forward,
Right.
that John relinquished control of the band, right? That's what's told to us in the book.
Right. And then in 67, you see another drastic change in music.
But that still doesn't mean that Billy wasn't there. All it says to me is that Billy was the guy that was eventually tapped. He could still have been working with the band and with George Martin prior to 1966, right?
Yeah.
So, and in all likelihood, John Lennon knew who he was.
Yeah.
Probably just didn't know at the time that he was going to be the guy tapped to take the lead role.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's how I kind of read into it.
We're going to get to, I'm looking at my clock because I know how much time I have.
No worries.
We're going to get to Rubber Soul at the end, but there were other tidbits. You drop little bombshells in this thing because there's so many, like it's nothing.
One more thing I wanted to mention was the clip where I have Ringo explaining, he called the songwriters they.
Yeah, and I saw another clip where he did the same thing, the writers. I sent it to you and I'm like, that's weird, bro.
Yeah. He doesn't say John and Paul. He says the writers.
Yeah. And then how many times do one of my, my background right now on my computer is from your presentation where the four of them are reading out of prepared books of music.
Yeah.
But here's another bombshell you dropped on me where I was like, oh, this was oh, by the way. Ed Sullivan was a part of this?
Yeah. In fact, that's in the book, The Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. He explains this. But then to validate that, there's a clip in the presentation where you hear George saying that, I believe it was George, where he said that Ed Sullivan had met them in London. Mm-hmm. Okay. So a lot of people like to, when it comes to the Beatle part of the book, The Committee of 300 by John Coleman, they'll say the rest of the book is brilliant, but the parts on the Beatles they don't like because it basically just tears apart the story, right?
Right.
But, he said that Ed Sullivan he was tapped to be the focal point to introduce them into the United States, and that, he had made trips out to London to meet with the band and to basically get his script and his orders as to how he was going to proceed.
Unbelievable. Here's this I love. I'm writing down so many of these, I'm going, through everything, Andy White, drummed for Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You.
Yeah.
Then, Bernard Purdy claimed to have 21 songs. Then you said this earlier, George Martin. They had the charisma. I thought their music was rubbish, but here's the one that's like, holy crap. You're talking about the great songwriting team of Lennon and McCartney, the great composers, Quincy Jones, non-playing MFers.
Yeah.
Woof!
That was devastating. And, and then there was this, again, there was Damage Control, and where the press played it up that Quincy apologized and he misspoke and all this stuff. But, then I found the tweet where he allegedly apologized.
Yeah.
He didn't retract anything.
Right.
He just said, I'm sorry for bad mouthing. That's all he said. He did not take back what he had said about their playing abilities, which he said they couldn't play. Now, some folks, they get angry with me for saying stuff like that. Don't get angry at me. Quincy Jones said this. I'm just telling you what Quincy said in Spin magazine.
God, he's talking about the Monkees.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable to me, but which leads us to Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, I'm looking at this whole thing, and again, this song was written, rehearsed, recorded, start to finish in 30 days between October 11th and November 11th, correct?
Right.
Okay.
That's the story, right?
That is the story. Now, to me, again, another smoking gun is the actual time it takes to manufacture an album, which we'll get into, okay? But when we look at this, October 11th through November 11th, Mike, we do look at, I believe, just prior to this, September 2nd, 1965, okay, the Beatles did have a 6-week break or hiatus.
Right.
Could this music not have been written in those 6 weeks?
People have brought that up, and the first thing I have to, I tell people is, first of all, that's not the official narrative. The official narrative says that they had no existing material other than little bits and pieces of Michelle and a couple of other songs, right? But no complete songs. They didn't have any backlog of material, and they were on the hook to record 16 original compositions between October 11th and November 11th. Now, people have come back to me and they have said, well, why couldn't they have written the songs during the break between coming back from the tour on September 2nd, 6 weeks, leading into October 11th? Well, my response to them is that, well, first of all, you're making up a new story because that's not the narrative that's given to us. But let's just set that aside for a second. Let's just say that they got off this hectic touring, which was 16 cities in 16 days, including one stop in Canada on the U.S. tour in 1965 in August. And as soon as they got off that airplane, they sat down, they got together as a band, and they started writing music. This means that the whole band would have had to convene, come together, start writing music, melodies, harmonies, and George Martin is going to have to participate because he has to do the arranging. Mm-hmm. Given 6 weeks to do 16 songs coming off a tour is really, it's not possible. People want to believe it's possible because they'll say, well, they were geniuses and, they had abilities beyond even some of the most talented musicians because, they were just capable of doing these things. But the truth of the matter is the Beatles have never called themselves geniuses. They never called themselves prodigies or any of that stuff. In fact, John Lennon in the 1980 interview in Playboy said that they couldn't read or write music. None of them were technically good musicians. Mm-hmm. So we have to go with what the official narrative is telling us. The official narrative doesn't say anything about them writing material during a 6-week break. And even if they did, when they got into the studio on October 11th, they would have had to have been so polished, had those songs down to the point where they could play them in their sleep in order to make it through that 30 days. It's not feasible.
Well, and it also, Mike, think about it for a second. Think about it logically, because I'm really a logic guy and I always go back to logic, and I know what it is like when we had a television taping and we were going to record 8 shows. Okay, Vince, you got to write these 8 shows before we get there. I know what the schedule is. Think about this. They know they're going into the studio October 11th to record a whole album. The narrative tells us they showed up on October 11th with nothing. So right. In other words, during those 6 weeks, they know in 6 weeks, we got to go into the studio. We have 1 month to record an album, and they're going to go into that studio with nothing. The only way they're going to go into that studio with nothing is if that work is already done for them. Otherwise, exactly. It makes no sense.
Exactly. All those songs were written. The basic tracks at the very least and the arranging, I believe, was already done. The music for the songs was completely done, recorded, and already mixed down. While they were on tour and doing their thing, this is what was going on behind the scenes with studio musicians and George Martin arranging the music. And again, the official narrative says that they walked into the Rubber Soul sessions with nothing. And they had to create those songs from scratch, blank sheet of paper, starting on October 11th. And to be honest with you, I didn't even pay attention or was aware of this timeline until I watched that DVD that I mentioned in the presentation. And, where the presenter is taking us through the timeline. And I got like 10 minutes into it. And I remember thinking to myself, this is impossible.
Yeah.
This is not possible. And the other thing I tried to explain in the presentation, Vince, is that when songwriters write, you don't just sit down and go, okay, well, I'm going to write a song, and you bang it out and you're like, okay, here we go. Here's one song. There's a lot of puts and takes. A lot of songs get started and then they get shelved because you might have a good start to a song, a good verse. You don't have a good chorus. Maybe you need a bridge, but you don't have a bridge yet to the song. It's a creative process. It's not something where you just crank it out. It's not like, you're on an assembly line and that's how you make songs or how you write songs. And for people who are not songwriters, this sometimes is difficult for them to get their heads wrapped around because the official story tells us that they were basically magicians. I mean, they could just create this stuff on the spot because they were just brilliant and they were geniuses. But so many people that follow my work are songwriters and musicians. And they've come back to me and said, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
16 songs in 30 days, starting from scratch, didn't happen.
And Mike, that's only half the story. Now we get into the manufacturing and say, somehow, some way, they were able to come up with these 16 masterpieces in 30 days. But now there's another problem. Because they're finished with the session by November 11th.
Right.
The album they want the album to be released December 3rd for the holidays.
Right.
So when we look at November 11th to December 3rd, we're looking at less than a month. We're looking at you're looking at about 3 weeks. Well, in order to manufacture an album, and Mike, I want you to take us through the steps because I don't think people really understand the finished product and what that takes. But when you look at the timeline of how long it takes to manufacture these albums and release these albums, we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes.
They did it in 3 weeks. So now you've got a bigger issue on top of what's already a big issue. If somehow they did these in 30 days, how in God's name did they release an album in 3 weeks when they had to have it pressed, the label? Walk us through that, Mike.
Well, the thing is, when you release a record, it's not just about recording songs. Obviously, you have to record songs to have tracks on a record, but you also have to press the records. And you have to create the record labels, the labels that get pressed onto the vinyl. You have to create the LP or record jackets, have photo shoots and all of this stuff. And in order to put all of that together, you have to have the names of the songs, the sequencing, what order the songs are in. You have to have the run times of the songs. Mm-hmm. You have to have all of this stuff. So the process of creating a record involves going through the printing process. It's the stamping of the records. It's bringing the records and the record jackets together and then staging the records for distribution and then getting the records out to retail outlets. What happened was when I was working with one of my team members who has been in the record business for a long time, he understands the record pressing process, the cycle time. He's not guessing. He knows exactly how it works. So when I was going through this and I said, okay, well, they finished up on November 11th and then the lacquer was cut on November 17th. So what the lacquer is, folks, is the lacquer is the final acetate of the record that then creates a stamper. You don't take a lacquer to make records. First of all, the lacquer has to be tested. You have to make sure that the lacquer is good, right? Once you go through that process, you create stampers. And the stampers are what actually press the records into the vinyl. The point I'm trying to make is there's this whole process, and it's not something that is easily expedited. And the whole bit about getting the record sleeves printed, you have to get that process started. It's called 4-ink printing process. Back in the day, when you created record sleeves, that had to go through a printing process. You run the 4 colors, it creates the actual picture, but then it needs a few days to dry before you could do anything with it. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is not just snap your fingers and everything just comes together. So there is a cycle time. There's a period of time that's required to be able to get a record out from the day the lacquer is cut to release when it ends up in a retail outlet. When I took my colleague through these dates and I said the lacquer was cut on November 17th and they got the records in the store on December 3rd, he said, it's impossible. I said, all right. So I said, explain to me. He said, Mike, when you print the record jacket, you have to have the names of the songs before you could do any printing. And many times on the back of the album, there's almost all of the time, there's the list of the songs. You have to know them. You can't make the record jacket and then add the songs later. It's all one process. He says the same thing with the record label itself, the round label that goes on the vinyl. You have to have the names of the songs. And he said, there is no way when that lacquer got cut, there was no time to get that printing process done from after November 11th to having the record released on December 3rd. Didn't happen. He says that process is a 6-week process. And a lot of times back in the day, it's 8 weeks. We used 6 weeks because I felt, okay, I'm going to use an expedited timetable here. Let's just say EMI pulled out all the stops to get that record out. And so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But the truth of the matter is the 6 weeks that I use in my presentation is aggressive. And that the actual time period back in the day, back in the 1960s, was probably 7 to 8 weeks. But again, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. So I hope this is making sense. We are told, the official story tells us that the Beatles finished 4 songs on the very last day of recording. You Won't See Me, Girl, Wait, and I'm Looking Through You on the very last day. So that means George Martin wouldn't have had the actual complete list of songs until the very last day.
And not only the songs, the times of each song.
The times of the songs.
That's the times of the song they had to know.
Right. So this creates a gigantic problem. It creates a huge, huge problem for the timetable. And the thing is, nobody has really ever looked at it before. And I wouldn't have looked at it if I didn't watch that DVD. And it was when I watched that DVD, see, what set it off for me was 16 brand new songs in 30 days. And I said, impossible. I didn't even blink. I said, that didn't happen. And then once I started investigating some more, and then it was explained to me the whole process to press a record and to get it out for sale in a retail outlet, the cycle time for that, 6 to 8 weeks, I'm like, oh my God, the whole thing just collapses. It's like a house of cards. So I hope I explained that well enough, Vince. But to net it out for the folks, look, in order for them to have had the record sleeves done in time, all of that stuff would have had to have started before they got into the studio. So what that means is the songs were already recorded, which means the songwriters wrote the songs. The songs were brought into the studio way before October 11th.
Yeah, Mike, you said that in the presentation, you said that the record should have been sent out by October 22nd for a December 3rd release. That's when it should, if this were going according to the time, it should have went out October 22nd. It went out November 11th.
That's when the whole process, with regard to the record sleeves would have had to been wrapped up no later than October 22nd. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to say, folks, I know if you watch the presentation, it's a lot clearer. It's hard to do here without the slides, but what that means is while the Beatles were finishing up their Christmas shows in early 1965, then doing the European tour, filming Help, recording the Help album, and then doing their U.S. tour in August. While they were doing all that stuff, behind the scenes, what was going on was the songs were written and recorded by studio musicians, session musicians. And so this way, what happened was when the music was done, George Martin already knew the times of the songs. He knew the names of the songs. He can sequence the songs for the album. So all that stuff was done. The photo shoot was done. So we have the names of the songs. We have the times of the songs. We have the sequencing, all of that, the photo shoot. Guess what? Now we can package the album sleeves and we can print the labels, the round labels for the vinyl. Mm-hmm. So we send that off. That's in the pipeline now. Music's done. When the Beatles show up on October 11th, what George Martin had was he had the music already recorded and already mixed down. That was already done. All they had to do was sing the songs. Based upon my work, that's what they did between October 11th and November 11th. The 30 days, they didn't write, rehearse, and record the music. They sang, a la the Monkees. And, you know, and I have clips in there where I'm showing how they're struggling with trying to get Think for Yourself down. Mm-hmm. That actual video clip, Vince, went on a lot longer. I actually had to edit it so I wouldn't bore people out of their skulls listening to it. But the bits I left in were indicative of, you know, what was going on. They were joking around. They were horsing around. They couldn't get the melody line. You could see they were struggling with the harmonies, you know. So this is why it came down to the wire. It was because, you know, this was a challenge for them. I know for people who haven't watched the presentation, this is going to sound like heresy, but, you know.
Mike, when, you know, it was very, very, and it doesn't end there, but it was very, very dramatic to me when you gave your conclusion. Yeah. After all this. So listen, Mike, you were just so nice, man. You just sent me 2 wonderful albums in the mail. Which I am so thankful and so grateful for. It's like freaking gold to me. And then you've told me a couple of times about your extensive Beatle collection. I know what a Beatle fan you are. I know what they mean to you and what they've meant to your life. How do you feel?
I've become actually numb to it in a way. I don't want to say numb, but dissociated from the Beatles. You know, it's a huge disappointment. It is. I'm not going to say that it's not. In previous shows, I've told folks that, you know, the luster is gone. But after I did this, it was really quite shocking, you know, to think that, all right, you know, we're down to they were doing the vocals. That's it. And I had to conclude that that's exactly what they were doing through the first 7 albums. When they tell us that Andy White drummed on Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, those are 2 songs that they want to tell us about. My guess is Andy White drummed on a lot more songs than those 2, and Andy's not with us anymore. And I'm sure Andy had to sign some kind of confidentiality agreement so that, you know, he wouldn't say anything. Bernard Purdie, who was a world-renowned drummer. He spent 25 years with Aretha Franklin. I mean, give me a break. And people want to say that Bernard's out of his mind and Bernard misremembered.
I loved Mike has a footage of Bernard, which I loved because during this you kind of seen the guy's character.
Yeah,
you know, you're seeing him, you're listening to him, and you know he did not come across as somebody that's just gonna make this up on a whim for no reason.
And he caught a lot of grief. He got a lot of grief for saying what he did. And, you know, but then he came out with his book in 2014, Let the Drums Speak. And he has a chapter dedicated to the Ringo Starr controversy. And Bernard does not back off the story. He says that he drummed on 21 songs on the early albums. So somebody could say, well, you know, they released 77 songs over the first 7 albums. So does that mean that Ringo drummed on 50 of them? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I don't think Ringo drummed on any of those songs. And if you listen very closely, listening to the drumming, the timekeeping is very precise. It's precision.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that they had other session drummers aside from Bernard and aside from Andy White. And like we said, we don't know. Maybe Andy White drummed on a lot of the early stuff. They just told us about 2 songs, Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. And then when you listen to the drumming after Revolver, which was the last of the first 7 albums, you hear different drumming. And in fact, if you listen to Lady Madonna, that's not Ringo on Lady Madonna. That's not Ringo. And in my view, I mean, again, we're back to very precise timekeeping, very tight drumming. So I do think Ringo drummed on songs starting with Sgt. Pepper, but even then he was paging in and out. We know Billy drummed on songs on the White Album.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Martha, My Dear. He did the Ballad of John and Yoko. Billy drumming on that song, which wasn't on the White Album, but later on, I don't know.
But then, Mike, you weren't done there because, again, you did this whole presentation based on a DVD. I think it's called The Deconstructing of Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
But then, Mike, I was a little astute here too, because now you're showing the time line on the albums that followed, and I'm looking at the presentation, and I'm like, wait a minute, the White Album.
Yeah. Yeah.
The White Album doesn't matter. I saw that before you even said it. Now, nobody, Mike, has said this prior to you before. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was I didn't want people to accuse me of just going after the biological Paul period, right? So they were like, oh, he just loves Billy, so he's going to, deep six, no pun intended, biological Paul. And so I said, so I'm going to take a look at one of the later albums. And I didn't want to choose Pepper because I already knew that Sgt. Pepper was Billy's baby, and it was tightly controlled by Billy and George Martin. So I said, let me move to something after that. So let's take a look at the White Album. And I had known that, the story was that the White Album, the songs of the White Album, most of them were written while they were in India with the Maharishi, that retreat. And even Wikipedia says the songs were written, most of the songs are written in the March-April timeframe.
Over 30.
Over 30. And one site said that they wrote 48. Okay? What they don't tell you in the story is that the Beatles' time in India was staggered. They arrived in mid-February, all four Beatles, around mid-February. Ringo was gone by March 1st. I'm doing this by memory. Billy was gone by March 15th or the very least the latter part of March. And George and John stayed 8 weeks. They left mid-April. Now, while they were in India, we all know that they were doing meditation and there were other activities at the retreat. How is it possible that as a band that they wrote over 30 songs when one of the primary songwriters, Billy, aka Paul McCartney, was out of there in March, mid to late March, and then John was out of there after 8 weeks. So you're going to tell us that they wrote 30 plus songs when we can't even say 8 weeks because half the band wasn't even there for 8 weeks. It's another story that when you put it under the microscope and you scrutinize it, it doesn't hold together. The Beatles did not write 30 plus songs in India because they didn't have the time to do it. And then, with the 50th anniversary release of the White Album, we get the Escher demos. And these are allegedly the demos that the Beatles did leading into the White Album recording sessions, which started on May 30th, 1968. And we are told that on a single day in May of 1968, prior to recording, they went to George Harrison's bungalow and they laid down 27 songs in a single day. And the day is unknown. This is the most remarkable thing. It's like the photo shoot for Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
I could not find a specific date for the photo shoot for Rubber Soul. Why is that? It's one of the most iconic photo albums of all time, and yet we have no exact date for it. Why is that? Well, I would posit it's because if we give you a date, you're going to start looking at the timeline. It's the same thing with the Escher demos, right? We don't have a date. And one of the sites, the Beatles Bible, clearly says that there is no date. And I thought to myself, okay, this is very, very strange. So again, one of the most iconic Beatle albums of all time, the White Album, there's a demo of songs of which I think it was 19 of the 27 songs recorded that day ended up on the White Album. Some ended up on Abbey Road and some of them actually never got released. Some later on in their solo career, like Not Guilty. How could we not have a date for that? And so I concluded that there were no 27 songs recorded in a single day. That the 27 songs, yes, there were demos. Of course, we have them. We have the recordings. But what they were was rehearsals over a period of time.
Yeah.
What that period of time is, I have no idea. It could be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, but it wasn't a single day.
Jeez.
It's not credible. So with the White Album, the 30 plus songs written in India, they had a staggered stay there. That's not credible. The 27 songs in one day for the White Album, the Escher demos, that's not credible. So what happened? So I applied the template that they used for Rubber Soul, which said that the songs were written. They were in process. And it's not to say they didn't record some of the songs during the White Album sessions. In other words, Billy didn't record and write and all that stuff, or John wasn't on recordings, or George wasn't on recordings. It doesn't mean that. It just means that by the time they got into the White Album sessions, beginning May 30th of 1968, the stage was already set. And it's possible that a lot of those songs were already recorded and that they overlaid the vocals. And there were other times where they did record and did the vocals. But I think with the White Album, what we have is, I think we have a mix of songs that were written by songwriters outside of the Beatles, plus songs that were actual compositions by the Beatles. And I believe we do have John and George actually writing songs and recording on the White Album. That's what I concluded. But it's a mix. It's a mix of the Beatles and a mix of not the Beatles on the White Album as far as musically playing.
One of the last things you have on the presentation, and again, what could this mean? What does this mean? But man, you present all of this so beautifully, Mike. And Mike, how many slides were involved in this?
It was like 150 or something, 140.
Just incredible. But one of the last things after this entire presentation is John Lennon saying the music is a myth.
Yeah. Rolling Stone magazine.
What does that mean?
Right. John said in Rolling Stone magazine that he kept talking about the Beatles myth. And, back in 1971, I think the interview was in 71, you would read that and a lot of people just glossed over it. What does it mean? Today, we have a much better understanding of what that means. And again, we have John telling us, of all the Beatles, John was probably the one that was actually spilling the beans the most. And in that Rolling Stone magazine and also the Playboy interview in 1980 was another one where he was just dropping bombs. And in those interviews, whether it was the Rolling Stone one or the Playboy one, I forgot, but he said they were craftsmen.
Right.
And he said that by the time the Beatles got to the U.S., they were already old hands, which meant they were already like seasoned veterans at doing what they did. And what they did, their task was to take the songs that were written, not by them, we're talking about the first 7 albums, was to learn them and then take it out on tour. They were the veneer. They were the front men for these songs. That's what their craft was. See, John didn't say we were songwriters. Mm-hmm. John didn't say we were composers. John said we were craftsmen. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a very strange way to word what it is that you do, because that's John's way of telling us. Also, craftsman is a term that we associate with Freemasonry. So a Freemason is a craftsman, the craft. And so I think John was basically giving us 2 clues: who they were, what club they belonged to, and what it is that they were doing.
Mike, I want to read something. I got a couple of things to read to you. One of them blows me away, man. And correct me if I'm wrong about this. This was kind of like 1969, and the Billy Shears, Billy Shepard conspiracy was really starting to take hold. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Life magazine went out to Paul McCartney's farm in Scotland.
Yeah.
To try to find out if there was any meat to this. Correct so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, from what I gather, Billy was first, paparazzi, get away from me, blocking himself from the camera. But then I heard that I guess they took some shots of him that he wasn't too pleased and he wasn't too happy with. So in exchange for them not printing those photos, he agreed to do a interview with them. I've got 2 excerpts from the interview, and one really blows me away. My first question to you before I read this first one is, Do you believe, like, once the Beatles were under the thumb of Tavistock,
Yeah.
were they under the thumb of Tavistock until the day until the day the band dissolved?
Yeah. I believe they were. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what happened was they were, they are a Tavistock creation. And so they are a Tavistock project. So in the early days, it came under the guidance and the direction of George Martin.
Okay.
And then the baton was handed to Billy.
Okay.
Starting in 1967 with Sgt. Pepper. But what we have to understand is that they all work for, I should say, on behalf of the pyramid of power, right? Of Tavistock's agenda, which is what I talked about, which was the human potential movement, the Aquarian conspiracy, which then made its way into the New Age movement and so on. Right. It's, this enlightenment that they talk about. And so, yes. So the answer to your question, Vince, is yes. They continue to work in the pyramid.
Listen to this quote, Mike, and you know all these, but I've read this, and now knowing what I know from you, I'm like, this is really interesting. This is from that Life 1971 article. Here's what he said. You see, there was a partnership contract put together years ago to hold us together as a group for 10 years. Anything anybody wanted to do, put out a record, anything, he had to get the other's permission. Because of what we were then, none of us ever looked at it when we signed it. We signed it in 67 and discovered it last year. It's talking about 71 now. We discovered this contract that bound us for 10 years. So it's, oh gosh, oh gal, oh golly, oh heck, Now boys can tear it up, please. But the trouble is the other three have been advised not to tear it up. They've been advised that if they tear it up, there will be serious bad consequences for them. The point, though, to me, was that it began to look like a 3-1 vote, which is what, in fact, happened at a couple of business meetings. It was 3-1, and then he goes into Alan Klein. But do you think is he talking about a Tavistock contract that if they didn't live up to the contract, bad things were? Because it's funny to me, he says they had been advised not to tear it up. They've been advised that if they tear it up, there will be bad, serious consequences to them. He never said their lawyers advised them.
Yeah, it's a very strange quote in that article. And, it's hard to really put a finger on what exactly he's talking about. The only thing I could think of is that they were all bound contractually as a band and what it is they could say, what they can do. I mean, they didn't have a lot of room. If you remember in my presentation is a clip of George Harrison saying from the anthology DVD that they didn't have a vote in anything.
Right. Yeah, I got that quote.
Remember that, right?
Yes.
And so I think that what Billy's alluding to there is that I think at that point, everybody was making decisions for us. That's what he said. Yes. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so I think what happened was as they pushed on, especially within, into phase 3, which was 67 through 70, there was a lot of, I think, terse moments between them. They got along. It was like love-hate type of thing, right? They got along. When I talk about they, I mean, Billy got along with the other three. The other three got along with him, but there were times when they didn't get along. And part of the reason for that is because Billy's work ethic, he was a perfectionist, or he still is, right? And this is something that John even mentions in interviews, that he would say Paul was a perfectionist, and he's referring to Billy. And that clashed with them. And because Billy wanted things to click along, and he wanted everybody on a tight leash because he had to manage this thing. The other three perhaps were starting to really, really tire of the rigor.
Yeah.
Maybe even talking about, this is just a farce. And they couldn't come out and say anything, because if they did, there would have been severe repercussions for it. What it would have been, I don't know. I believe it probably could have meant very significant legal issues, probably retraction of financial gains, because all of this stuff would have been predicated on them keeping to the terms and conditions of the contracts that they signed.
Yeah.
So if they started flapping their lips, it would have been a big problem.
Yeah.
That's why when people say, how come they don't talk about it? Well, I think a big reason is because they could have lost everything.
Yeah. Now, here's the best part to me, man. Keep in mind this 1971 Life article, the whole thing started off of the hoax and them trying to find out if there was any meat to this. This is the last thing he says, which blows me away, because it's like, okay, they're coming. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Well, I don't like some of the pictures. You don't publish those pictures. I'll give you the story. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the last thing he says. So I think you've got to live your own life. That sounds like one of those statements, but it is, in fact, just very necessary to realize that. And particularly necessary for me, or else someone else is going to be living part of your life.
Yeah.
He goes, or else somebody else is going to be living part of your life for you.
Yeah. What does that mean, right?
Bro, that's what they went there for. He tells them when it's all over, and it just blew by them. Like, what the frig does that mean? If you're not living your life right now, Mike Williams, if you're not living the life of Mike Williams, then who is living the Mike Williams life?
Right.
An imposter it would have to be.
Exactly. That's why, Vince, in the beginning of the show, we said that he's been dropping clues since day one. And if you really read these interviews closely, the things that he says, the things that John had said, George and Ringo, if you listen to the interviews or you read them very closely, knowing what we know now, you can start to pick it apart, And
particularly necessary for me, or else someone else is going to be living part of your life for you.
Right.
You know what I noticed too, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to watch Help, and we'll end it on this. This is a little note, but one of the reasons I wanted to watch Help, because that's biological, Paul.
Yeah.
Was, did he do everything with his left hand? And he did. He did. Man, when you watch, there are a lot of Wing documentaries out there and stuff. He does everything with his right hand. And Mike, I'm going to be 60. And the things he's doing with his right hand, even at my age, would be very awkward for me to do with my left hand. And like I said, when you look at those, everything was lefty, lefty, lefty. It just seemed later on when he let that guard down, he just comes across as a natural right-handed guy. I know it's a little thing, but it's very noticeable.
No, that's one of the things that we pick up on. See, when I started the presentation, one of the first two charts or so, I said one example by itself might not mean anything.
Right.
But a stream of evidence can be very significant. And I intentionally phrased it that way because, yes, we can sit there and say, we can make excuses all day as to why he's going lefty, righty, whatever it may be. But then when you pick up on that and then you move to something else and then something else and something else, and then you start to see patterns forming. And then you have to apply common sense and logic and say, okay, something is up here. This does not look right. What they want us to do is they want to distract us from doing that, from focusing on those little details, those little nuanced things that we pick up on, and just kind of chalk them up as just doesn't really mean anything. It's like the article you just read, and there's many articles like that, right? We can read it and say, oh, I don't think it really means anything. What's he talking about? Oh, I don't know. And then people just walk away from it.
Yeah. But
they're telling you. And it's been one crazy ride, I could tell you that.
Well, Mike, I can tell you this, man. This all started for me, and you probably know the exact date. I'll never forget it, man. It had to be back in 67 or 68. F. Lee Bailey, the famous lawyer, hosted a special in primetime TV all about this.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going full circle now, Mike, because here we are, 40, 50 years later, you blew F. Lee Bailey out of the water, Mike, with this president. Mike, this president, man, Mike, this was magnificent, man. Magnificent.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And it's hard to do it justice, without seeing the slide.
Yeah.
Because to see the dates and everything else, it's kind of hard to picture.
Let everybody know exactly where to go to see this, because guys, and I recommend do an hour a night. Do exactly what I did. Do an hour a night. Break this thing up. But where do they go, Mike?
Just go to my hub website, Sage of Quay, SAGEOFQUAY, sageofquay.com, and then just page down a little bit. And I actually added it to my website, so you can just go there and see it. Or you can just click the link to my Paul is Dead channel or my main YouTube channel, and you can actually watch it there as well. So it's up on BitChute. I have a BitChute account, but all the links to all of those social media platforms are all on my hub website, and you can just go there and click away.
And you have a Patreon too, right, Mike?
I have a Patreon. Yeah, it's anemic, but yes, I do. But yeah, if you go to my hub website, you'll see the link there for my Patreon page as well.
Well, I know what I'm going to do, because there's no way you're done, because we know Billy's back is coming out in the summer. So here's what I'm going to do. And here's what everybody else is going to do, because Mike is the absolute best. Mike, I swear to God, you're such a great presenter. You do all this without trying to sway anybody either way.
No.
You present the fact, and that's why I get so pissed off at you when you give us little tidbits about getting hate mail and this and that. You are the most honest. Listen, here's the information. Do what you want with the information. That's what I love about you. But here's what I know I'm going to do, because we could have talked about Corona for 3 hours.
Yeah.
I would assume that's going to be heavily talked about now on the Sage of Quay, correct?
I'm actually putting little blurbs out, short videos, 5 to 10 minutes, where I'm just trying to get people to kind of wake up and understand that what you're being shown on the mainstream media is not actually reality. And I'm trying to get people to connect dots that way. Yeah. I don't know how successful I'm going to be, but I'm trying to do that. I will, when Billy's Back comes out,
the summer,
it's going to be summer, summer of this year, I will take a look at the footnotes and read through the book, and I will do a little something on that. I will do something on that. But as far as major presentations on the Beatles, I'm not going to be doing any more major presentations, because the way I look at it, Vince, is this has been step by step. The first thing was, let's talk about the memoirs of Billy Shears because of what's contained in the book. Let's talk about the fact that biological Paul McCartney was replaced by somebody. Then let's get into the occult aspects of the Beatles. They are immersed in the occult. That was like phase 2. And phase 3 was the Beatles were not what we were told that they were at all, that they did not write all of their own music. And that's not to say they did not write some of their music, but they did not write all of the music we are told that they wrote. And so, once I did this last presentation, like you said, 4.5 hours, I thought to myself, well, where do I go from here? Really, where do I go from here? Some people still want me to talk about Paul is Dead clues, but I responded back to them. I said, look, I'm past that. Mm-hmm. It's beyond that now. We've gotten into the occult. That was the next step. We've gotten kind of past that now. I have lots of shows that talk about the occult aspects of it. So if you're interested in that, you can watch that. And now I've gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, the whole thing was so fabricated to the point where it's even beyond comprehension for just about everybody. The good news is, though, that I was waiting for a real storm to just come my way because, so many people love the Beatles, worship the Beatles. It's worship. It is. It's idol worship. And I was one of those people. So when I put this last presentation out, I thought, okay, here it comes. The tidal wave of hate and all that stuff is going to come. And it didn't. It's been overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly. I've been driven to do this, Vince. There were many times along this journey where I questioned why I was doing this. I started to question, why am I doing this? I don't have to do this. I have other things in my life that I could be doing that are a lot more interesting than this. I mean, as far as giving me fulfillment in life. But there was this little voice in my head that said, keep going, keep going, keep going. You are almost there. Carry the ball 1 more yard and you're over the goal line. And that's how this is kind of played out, you know. And I had a lot of obstacles between last year to when I got this out. A lot of things that transpired in my own personal life as far as things that had to do with health and family members and everything else that I had to deal with. It was grueling. But finally it's out and people can watch it and decide for themselves. If you don't agree, you don't agree.
Well, you know, again, Mike, you say this all the time, and you've said this with every presentation you've ever done. You just provide the facts. And I think that's why you're not getting a negative backlash. I mean, you can't argue with these dates. These are real dates. These are real times. They're documented. You can't argue with them.
I had somebody write me from within the music industry who watched the presentation, and they said, you realize that nobody's going to be able to present the official narrative going forward without having to, in some fashion, address what you put out. Mm-hmm. I guess they can choose to ignore it. You know, that's an option, but they always run the risk that there's going to be somebody that has seen the presentation and is going to say, but what about the dates? Mm-hmm. What about the 16 songs in 30 days? What about the 30 plus songs in India? The 27 songs on some unknown day in May for the White Album? Mm-hmm. How about the Mercy Beat article? What's that about? Do we just gloss over that? Mm-hmm. Was that also like somebody writing something that they wrote the wrong thing down and it got published? Mm-hmm. You know, it gets to a point where you can't continue to dodge the bullet on this thing. You know, the article about them being in a haze of marijuana during the filming of Help, that not only affected the filming of Help, but that also affected any storyline that had to do with writing music during that period. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these are all things that now going forward, this is what this person told me. They said it's going to have to be dealt with. So, you know, I felt good about that. And, but I didn't do this to throw a monkey wrench into anything. I really didn't. I just did it because I found it interesting to look at this and then think to myself, how come nobody else ever counted up the days?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, yeah. And I look, and I'm guilty of it. I didn't. It's just, I happened to be watching that DVD, which by the way is very well presented. Scott Fryman does a great job on the DVD, but it is the official narrative. Does a wonderful job on it. But I remember watching it and then a light bulb went off and I said, okay, hold on a second. The tires screeched. I'm like, this didn't happen. And that's what set me on the path.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Mike, you've, to every fan of the Beatles and anybody who's been following this story for decades, man, it wouldn't have been the same without you. I am so happy I stumbled upon you. I'm so happy we got to become friends. I'm going to be the first one knocking on the door in the summer. Yeah. The first one, Mike. Tell me about this. What is this? The thing I love too, like especially when you get into the books, is, man, all the information's in the footnotes.
Yeah.
And you have a way of really just dissecting those data. First of all, I'm too old. I can't even read the print. It's so small.
Yeah, well, I got readers too.
But Mike, man, I can't thank you enough. Man, I hope to have you on here. We could discuss any other topic.
Yeah.
I love you as a podcaster. I love you as an information provider, man. And I just want you to know, I personally, man, thank you for this incredible work that you've done.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you for having me on the show. This is the agreement we had too, folks. I told Vince he'd be the very first one to talk to me about the presentation. That was way back, I think October of last year.
Yeah, and that's how long you didn't forget.
I did not forget. I keep to my commitments.
Yeah. Well, everybody, it's sageofquay.com. You can go there and that will lead you to all the places that you need to be. Mike Williams, thank you for allowing me to experience this through your eyes. It's been an amazing, amazing trip.
Thank you, Vince.
This picture was when we were arriving at, I think it was the Deauville Hotel in Miami.
I think your quote in the book was, I can almost hear her scream.
Yeah, you can. The cop's got to restrain her, you know.
Well, I also love the cop in the foreground who just sort of looks puzzled by everything.
I know. Yeah. I like the architecture.
So do I.
That hotel. But, you know, as we were saying before, that had to be taken really quickly.
Yeah.
Just had to snap that.
Yeah. But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
Welcome everybody to a very special edition of Glass Onions. One that I am sure will go over at least 2 weeks. Because, man, I got to tell you something. When I have this guest on, it's like Christmas morn. I mean, it really, really is. And I got to be honest, man, I don't bother him as much as I should because I know he's very, very busy. He's got two tremendously popular sites, Sage of Quay, the Paul is Dead channel. Not only that, bro, he's a great musician. I've heard his stuff. Mike sends me his stuff all the time, and I absolutely love it. Hey, listen, as far as I'm concerned, this man is a national treasure. I'm just going to say it, and I'm just going to put it out there. And it's an honor to always have him on the show. And I am talking about the great Mike Williams. Mike,
there's no way I can live up to that, Vince.
Come on, Mike. Come on. You know I love having you on this show.
Well,
Mike,
thank you for having me back.
I got to tell you, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Bro, attention span gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And Mike, this has really kind of dictated the way that I watch television because 99% of the time I'm on YouTube. And the first thing I look at is length. And, bro, 30 minutes is real close. Like anything over 30 minutes, I'm not watching. It's too long.
Right. But
then I come up to Sage of Quay, and it's 2.5, 3 hours. And Mike, I sit there and I watch the whole thing. Your show is the only show that keeps me there for 3 hours.
Well, thank you, Vince. I'm glad that I'm keeping your interest.
Well, and Mike, listen, I find it so fascinating because I believe the last time I had you on the show, which was a while ago, Mike, you were close to packing it up. You were done. You were walking away into the sunset. Mike, what happened, Mike? What happened?
What happens, Vince, is that the rabbit hole gets deeper and deeper. So just when you think, okay, I've gotten to a point where I can step away from this and move on to other stuff, something else pops up. And so, it piques your interest and you think to yourself, okay, let me take a look. And before you know it, a whole other story now is unrolling, and it's like, I know we're not going to probably talk about this, but as an example, I had another researcher on my channel, Stacy, who went into possibilities with regard to Billy, who plays the role of Paul McCartney, his family and his ancestry. Mm-hmm. So, I wasn't really planning on getting into that, but then somebody contacts me and she did very compelling work. It's very, very good work. And so that's an example of how that really wasn't on the radar per se, but then it lands in your lap. So you have to make a decision. Do I do something with this or do I just turn my back and walk away? So I decided, well, after 7 years or so of doing this, I might as well do it, right?
Well, and Mike, the thing with you is this is what is so unbelievable about you. You don't just come on here and do a podcast, Mike. You got to do a slide presentation that takes you about 5.5 years, which is so thorough. And you've got everything. Mike, nobody makes a presentation like you.
Well, thank you, Vincent. But the reason why I do that is because I'm doing research in an area that most people just don't want to listen to. Right. They don't believe it.
Right.
So if you're just going to come on and talk about it, well, then it's just words. But if you can help the presentation by putting up the slides and explaining what's going on and connecting some dots, hopefully you can get some people to better understand what it is that you're bringing forth. So that's why the slide presentations are important.
Oh, extremely important. I got to tell you though, Mike, I tried so hard to follow this, and I think I got lost in this one. I got lost in the 28 if. I was trying so hard to follow that. Man, I stopped it. I went back. I stopped. That was a hard one for me to follow.
It was quite a decoding, and the guy that did it was John Black, and he's a subscriber of my channel, and he just sent me an email and said, I think I've decoded the license plate on the Abbey Road album. And over the years, I've heard different iterations and theories about what the plate means. So when John brought it to me, I said, okay, let me take a look. So he shared it with me. But basically, just to summarize it, what John did was to show that the plate was really an anagram. It created an anagram.
Mm-hmm.
And from that anagram, there were some missing letters, and the 2 and the 8, like LMW is the plate. It's LMW 28IF. And actually, my British subscribers have said to me that the letter I doesn't exist in your license plates. It's the number 1, because otherwise ones and I's can get mixed up and confused. But in either case, it really, for the sake of what the Beatles were doing on the album, it really doesn't matter whether it's a 1 or an I. In my opinion, Billy was using it as an I. LMW 28 if. And so what John did was to decode the LMW part, which is Lady Madonna Wednesday. So Lady Madonna Wednesday. And so what comes after Wednesday in the song? Well, Wednesday mornings, papers didn't come. So papers didn't come is how the anagram was created. And when he did the anagram and worked on it, papers didn't come spelt out P. McCartney dies, OPD, officially pronounced dead. So for those who follow the Paul is Dead conspiracy, OPD is the patch that Billy or Paul McCartney is wearing in the gatefold of the Sgt. Pepper album, officially pronounced dead. But the anagram was missing 2 letters. It was missing a C and it was missing a Y. So the 28 part was telling us that after the second letter in the anagram, PM McCartney, you have to insert a letter. Well, that letter was the letter C, because McCartney has 2 C's, MCC, ARTNEY. And then after the 8th letter, in this case in the anagram, and what I'll do is I'll put the link in the show for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. That would
so
be
everybody
great.
can see it, because they're probably going, I don't know what this guy's talking about. But if you insert the Y after the 8th letter, which was E, then you get the full spelling of P. McCartney, and then dies OPD. So the if part, what John was saying was, if you replace the letters, if you put the proper letters in its place after the 2nd and 8th position of the anagram, the missing letters, then you get the word P. McCartney or Paul McCartney, and then dies OPD. So what John is saying is that the license plate is telling us that Paul McCartney was dead. Paul McCartney wasn't there in 1969, in September of 69, when Abbey Road was released. Another clue of that Volkswagen on the cover of Abbey Road, it's a Volkswagen Beetle. And it's a Volkswagen Beetle. So I believe another clue that was being dropped, because these clues that the Beatles were dropping on the album covers, many times it had more than one meaning. So John's decoding could very well be. Then Stacy came on, and she had another, that's the researcher who did his family tree, his ancestry. She had another interpretation, which was also very compelling, that goes back to his ancestry. And I won't get into that, because that's a long, drawn out explanation that I'll probably screw up. I'll leave the link to that one too down below. And but my interpretation after so many years is, I think what they were telling us is that there were 5 Beatles on Abbey Road. There were 4 that were going across the crosswalk, which included Billy as Paul McCartney. And then there was the Volkswagen Beetle on the left-hand side of the road, or our left, which would be an indication of the Beatles and their involvement in paganism, thelema, Crowley's thelema, the left-handed path. Okay, so if that gets a bit esoteric for some folks, we'll just leave it at the Volkswagen Beetle represented the fifth Beatle who was not there because, he had passed away back in 1966. So anyway, we'll leave a link, folks, down below for that. It's a very short video. It's about, I think it's less than 10 minutes. And if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll explain.
You are always blowing my mind. Now, before we get into, I've got numerous topics. I do want to ask you this though. Who and let's give the credit where it came from. The woman's name escapes me that came up with the fake eye.
Sally Whitty.
Sally Whitty. I gotta. So Mike, just tell people briefly what Sally has uncovered.
Sally uncovered that Billy Shears, the person who's playing the role of Paul McCartney and has been, he has the primary contract since 1966. He has a artificial eye. His right eye, he's blind in his right eye. And obviously he could see with his left. And going back, I would say probably about a year ago or so, we have a little group, a little forum that we converse on, and we share information with each other. It's myself and 3 or 4 other very close colleagues and friends, and we've been together for years. And so she was putting some images up of Billy's eye, of Paul McCartney's eye. What is she getting at here? And so finally it dawned on me, well, I think she's saying that he has a problem with his right eye. And so what happened was Sally and I spoke, and originally that revelation that Billy is blind in his right eye was going to be part of a larger presentation, because she was going to get into a lot of esoteric mythology with regard to Pan and stuff like that, because the Beatles are all, intertwined with a lot of mythology, Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. And I said to her, you know what, don't do that. This is too important, because him having an artificial eye is proof positive that he is not biological Paul. Right? We could talk about he's taller than Paul. He has different ears. His jawline is longer. All of that stuff. All of that stuff is true. But it's not as concrete as knowing that he has a fake eye, an ocular prosthetic. And I should also say that the way that Sally caught this is because Sally has an artificial eye. Mm-hmm. She's blind in her left eye. And so what she did was she was just watching videos of him, and she was taking a look at images, stills, and she picked up on the fact that his right eye, in which he's blind in, was not always tracking with his left eye. Now, the tracking is actually very good, because Billy obviously has the best doctors working with him. And there's a misconception out there, I should explain this to the audience, that some people think that if you have an artificial eye that it doesn't move, it's static, it just looks straight ahead. It's not true. Depending upon the level of damage to the eye, I mean, if you have a lot of damage to the eye, that could be that the eye is static. But in most cases, that's not the case. Your ocularist will ensure that you have movement with the eye that's artificial. And what Sally found was it's more observable when you see Billy in concert. So when he's looking right, he's looking left. What I've noticed is whenever he looks hard left, his right eye, his eye that he's blind in, doesn't move as far left as his good eye. Mm-hmm. So that's where you see the alignment issue with his eyes. So then what happened was, so we presented this back in October of 2022, and it was quite a revelation. And
Mike, let me ask you one question before you go forward. Yeah. Before I forget this. Now, you mentioned that this is very, very important because, again, the the real Paul McCartney did not have a artificial eye.
Right.
But however, my question to you is, once Billy took over, how do we know he didn't lose his eye at that point? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. That question has come up before. So Sally and I discussed this in the follow-up show that we did. I guess it was about 2 months ago or so. I lose track of time sometimes. It becomes a big blur. But anything's possible. Let's just say that, right? It could have happened, right? But Sally said it's highly unlikely because she said that people who lose an eye early on in life, they are much more adaptable to being comfortable with the eye. Mm-hmm. So because you lost your eye at a young age, you have a lot of time, a lot of runway to get yourself acclimated to seeing only with one eye. She said that it's difficult for adults when they lose an eye mm-hmm. to have that sense of orientation. In other words, things just might seem off perspective-wise and stuff like that. So she leans toward at a young age, he lost his eye. But like I said, anything is possible. But she said the fact that he's so natural with it would lend credence to the argument that he lost it much earlier in life as a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, here's the only thing I would ask. And this is, listen, man, when you look at the footage, bro, if Mike, if you could leave the link for this as well.
I will.
If you guys look at the footage, there's no question there is an issue with that eye. There is absolutely no question about it whatsoever. I'm just going to throw this out at you, Mike, because it's just going to be your opinion. If this is true, then why wouldn't he have made it public? I mean, Sammy Davis Jr., perfect example. In the prime of his stardom, he got in that car accident and he lost an eye, and we knew Sammy had, why wouldn't this be made public, do you think?
It wouldn't be made public because Paul McCartney never made any mention, the real Paul McCartney, biological Paul McCartney, about having any issues with his eyes. He had two good eyes. So for Billy, as Paul McCartney, to come out at some point and to talk about it, then what's going to happen is there's going to be a discussion about how did it happen, and how did you avoid the public arena mm-hmm. if you had a problem with your eye, you had an accident and you were blinded, your right eye became blind. Well, he's such a public figure and he's everywhere. Then the question would be, so when was the downtime when the eye was healing, or when you were getting acclimated to having an ocular prosthetic? So I think Vince, again, my opinion is the reason why it didn't come out was because biological Paul had two good eyes, and for it to come up would have created a whole set of issues.
Yeah, it opens up a Pandora's box.
It didn't have to be discussed because
that makes sense.
Most people don't see the eye, don't see the bad eye. So it's just business as usual.
Now, here's one of the topics today. I got to reach down. Mike, nobody has studied memoirs like you. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. And Mike, as a guy that hates to read, that is the last book I read. And I went through that book and I tried to understand it as best as I could. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about this. And of course, I wish this was an original, Mike, but it's not. There you go. Mike, is that an original?
Well, actually, I have originals. This one is a replica of what they call the first state. This would have been one of the promo copies that went out.
Right.
But I have actuals. I'll show them as we talk.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, now here's the first question I want to ask you. Mike, I don't remember this at all being discussed in memoirs. Was it?
No, it wasn't discussed in memoirs.
Is that a little odd to you?
Now that you mention it, it probably is a little odd. And probably because it would get into a discussion about why it was done. I guess it could have been inserted into the chapters that talk about the occultism around the Beatles. It could have been inserted there. In fact, you know what? I'm going to drop Tom Harriet an email and ask him.
See, I made that happen, right? Yeah. Yes, Mike. All right. Let's get, because I mean, Mike, everything was covered in that book. And I just found it really odd. Because as I was thinking, I don't think it was spoken about.
No.
So, Mike, to give a little background, just to let everybody know, this album came out March 25th, 1966. There was a photographer by the name of Robert Whitaker, and there was a photo session for this album cover in which the Beatles and Mr. Whitaker, they whether they were having fun, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. But a lot of strange photos were taken because it wasn't just the doll parts and the meat.
No, right.
There were bird cages involved, and even I know now what that means. Okay, and you can explain that to everybody. But Mike, see, this I did not know. As I got into other shots for the record cover, there's George Harrison driving a nail in John Lennon's head.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys have to understand this. This is 65. And, we're still talking about the cute and cuddly Beatles. Like, this is such to the other extreme that they're doing a photo session like this and even thinking about putting out an album cover like this. And you sent me a clip, and I had read that as well, that they weren't going to go with the Butcher cover, but John Lennon was really a fan of that. And John Lennon kind of pushed the issue, and Brian Epstein went along with it, sold it to the record company, and they printed the album cover.
Yeah.
Mike, I so want your thoughts on this, the purpose behind the photo shoot, how in God's name the cover made it to press. Did somebody actually think this was a good idea and this was a goof? Or again, we've learned this about Illuminati, man. They put it out there. They put it out there right in front of your face, so we can't say you didn't tell us. They put it out there, but it's so unbelievable that nobody believes it. Right. I mean, that's the gimmick. So just kind of give me a little background and your thoughts and theories into this album cover.
Okay, so like you said, Robert Whitaker was the photographer doing the photo shoots, and the clip I sent you of John Lennon discussing the Butcher cover, he explains that Robert Whitaker was a surrealist, and and the Beatles themselves were in favor of doing the photo shoot and what became the Butcher album cover because it was different. They got tired of the plain old, straightforward photo shoots and album covers. And in that interview, John states that he really wanted to do it. So the reason why I'm explaining that is because there are folks that are in the Polish Dead research and in the Polish Dead community that believe that the Beatles were forced to do that album cover. They really didn't want to do it. Of course, that's a natural reaction because you're thinking to yourself, well, I idolize these guys and I don't really want to get behind the fact that this was something they wanted to do because it's a strange album cover to say the least. So in any case, John says that they wanted to do it, and John specifically said he was leading the charge on it. And I'll leave the link to that interview as well. Folks can listen to it. So I believe what happened, and I'll give you my opinion on this, Vince, is that the Beatles as an entity are just immersed in the occult. There's a lot of occultism around the Beatles. And if you go to my channel, this is to the audience, I have a number of presentations where I take everybody through this. And what they do every once in a while is to float something out there as a trial balloon, as part of the conditioning process. So you didn't see the Beatles, this way ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, there was occultism on their other album covers, and I can show you some of that in a bit, but it wasn't this blatant. So what happened was Capitol sent promotional copies out. And in the interview that John Lennon did, that we just talked about, I think he said about 60,000 copies went out.
Mm-hmm.
And when they went out, and this is in the US, by the way, because Yesterday and Today, which was the title of the album, was a US Capitol release. It was not a UK release. So it went out as a promotional copy. And then, of course, the backlash, people who received it, DJs and so on, were like, what is this? And
but
so
to stop you there, Mike, and I hate to interrupt you, but I want to hit key points. They had to know that was going to be the feedback.
Yeah, they did know. They did know. And that's it. That's the thing. They did know, they knew what the reaction was going to be, but it was shock value. And they knew that, once you have that in your head, right? Once the news went out that this album cover was the initial cover for the Beatles Capitol release Yesterday and Today, that it was going to draw people's attention to it. See, that's what it's all about with occultism. Occultism is about drawing your attention, your focus, and your consciousness to focus your thoughts on what they want you to focus on. So even though this was on the surface short-lived, it really wasn't short-lived, because what happened afterwards is, in fact, let me just read this here for you. There's a letter that went out.
Yeah,
I
go ahead, read it. I have it right up here, but go ahead and read it. I think it's important. Yeah.
Okay, so it says, Dear Reviewer. So it went out to reviewers, and I think it went out to DJs. So this wasn't the original album. My understanding is it did not go out to retail. Okay, so it says, Dear Reviewer, in the past few days, you may have received an advanced promotional copy of the Beatles' new album, the Beatles Yesterday and Today. In accordance with the following statement from Alan Livingston, president of Capitol Records, the original album cover is being discarded and a new jacket is being prepared. So it goes on to say the original cover created in England was intended as, quote, pop art. And we'll get into this as we talk more about Taylor Swift. However, a sampling of public opinion in the United States, a sampling of public opinion, so in other words, they're polling to see how receptive the album was to the public, in the United States indicates that the cover design is subject to misinterpretation. For this reason, and to avoid any possible controversy or undeserved harm to the Beatles' image or reputation, Capitol has chosen to withdraw the LP and substitute a more generally accepted design. All consumer copies of the Beatles album will be packaged in the new cover, which will be available within the next week to 10 days. As soon as they are, we will forward you a copy. In the meantime, we would appreciate your discarding the promotional album and, if at all possible, returning it COD to Capitol Records, 1750 North Vine Street, Hollywood, California, 90028. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. Sincerely, Ron Tepper, Manager of Press and Information Services for Capitol Records.
Can you imagine, Mike, if you were one of those people that sent it back?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? So when we talk about it, so you're making a good point, because you're segueing into where I was going to go next, Vince.
Yeah.
So even though it was it appeared to be a temporary thing, 60,000 copies or whatever, it has lived on. So then what happened was, then Capitol released Yesterday and Today with this cover.
Right. Now, supposedly this was shot at the same session.
Was it?
From what I read, it was. But I think Lennon says something different, because the article I read, this was shot as well. So I'm saying, if they shot this, they had to know that this was a backup.
Right.
I mean, no question. You do not have the extremes of the bird cage and the body parts and the nail in the head, and then this. But that clip you sent me from John Lennon, he alludes to the fact that they went back and reshot and this was it.
Yeah, so I don't know whether it was shot the same day or afterward, but in either case, what happened was this wound up being the new cover. And you can see, look at the difference, folks, between the covers. Let me just go back to, here it is. Okay. So we have this image here, right? The original cover, and they're all smiling and happy. And then we get to the replacement cover, and they're all demure.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now the reason why the Butcher cover has lived on in infamy is because if we take a look here, right? I don't know if you can see this, but that's Ringo's turtleneck.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
The black.
Now what happened was they slicked over the original cover. So now what people were doing was they were either leaving these alone, knowing they had a Butcher, or they were steaming the covers off. And so by steaming the covers off, now people are re-engaging with that album cover.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That people, weren't supposed to see. So for those who steamed it off, now this is a steamed copy. Okay.
Wow. That's a steamed copy?
That's a steamed copy. It's
wow,
really
that's
good.
The best steamed copy I've ever seen.
I've had these for years. All right. So
wow.
The point being is that the Butcher cover never went away. It was still in the consciousness of Beatle fans. And so the focus has always been there. And in fact, I checked on eBay this morning because I haven't looked at records in a long, long time. You know that I have a large collection like you do. Mm-hmm. But what I have had for a very long time now. Mm-hmm. But I went on to eBay to take a look at what the Butchers are getting now, depending upon whether it's first state. First state is the original promotional copy. Second state is the paste over with the mm-hmm. trunk cover, which, by the way, is a Paul is Dead clue. Paul sitting in a trunk.
Right.
And then we have the third state, which is the peeled covers. And they're going for like anywhere between $1,200 and $5,000.
Crazy, man.
On eBay. So this still highly collectible. And so, it's like I said, it's one of those things where it was table setting. It was conditioning. It was to get people to take a look at the Beatles in a different light. Like, what's this all about? So that whole clean cut image, that has been kind of demolished, right? With the Butcher cover, because they're doing something here that's very, very strange. And for many people, very disturbing. And it's a very disturbing album cover. So it's about implanting and putting into people's heads, different thoughts. So that this way, what they do down the road, when I say they, I'm talking about the controller. So I will probably talk a little bit about Tavistock and the CIA and stuff like that. It's about changing your opinions and moving people in a different direction. So that, to me, is what the Butcher cover was all about. And like I said, it wasn't short-lived. To this day, people are still talking about it.
Absolutely, man. Now, Mike, you blew me away with a little, you dropped a little line in one of your emails to me as far as the song selection.
Yeah.
I've never, ever heard before, man. So this, I can't wait to hear from you.
Yeah. So what happened was I've always found the song sequencing on the album to be a little odd in the sense that it appeared to me like they were telling a story. So if we go back to the paste over cover here, mm-hmm. we could see Paul is sitting in a trunk. Mm-hmm. So this is a clue. Paul is dead. So think of the trunk as like a coffin. Okay. And as we just mentioned, everybody has this kind of demure, unhappy look on their face, right? And it's the Beatles yesterday, in the past, and today and moving forward. So if we take a look at the songs, right, let's just read them off. So at this point, I have contended that Billy, the person playing Paul McCartney, he just did not appear in September of 1966 to take on the role of Paul McCartney. I believe that Billy has been in the inner circle of the Beatles, possibly as a ghostwriter, possibly as a session musician on their recorded tracks, going back to 1962.
Well, yeah, because see, that's the thing that I was a little confused of, Mike, because this photo session they are saying was March of 1966.
Yeah.
So if the replacement would have come in September of 66,
yeah,
then this if you're just going by the dates, this album should have nothing to do with Billy.
Right.
What's your thoughts on that?
I believe Billy's been there
since 62.
I believe as early as 1962. I believe, based upon the research, well, let me just give you a good example of why I believe Billy was there before 1966. A number of years ago, going back about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was, and it's in my big presentation, going back to April of 2020, did the Beatles write all their own music? Mm-hmm. Billy, he was quoted as saying that he wrote the music to In My Life, the Beatles song In My Life, mm-hmm. which has always been credited to John Lennon. It was a John Lennon song. Mm-hmm. Now, In My Life was released in 1965. So the question becomes, okay, so most people look at it this way. Paul McCartney is saying he wrote the music to In My Life, and John was more, his thing was the lyrics to the song. So what happened was when Billy came out and said he wrote the music to In My Life, the mainstream press went into damage control. So what happened was there was 2 universities, I forgot who they were, that were given the task to run a computer model to determine who was the actual songwriter for In My Life. And the computer model came back and said, nope, Paul McCartney, or Billy, misremembered. John Lennon wrote that song, right? Now, here's the thing. Folks, as a songwriter myself, mm-hmm. You never forget a song that you wrote, especially when it is a classic. And In My Life is a Beatles song that whenever it is a classic rock poll by Rolling Stone magazine or Billboard magazine, it always ends up in the upper tier of the ranking, the top 100 or whatever, top 50. It's always in the top 10. Mm-hmm. So you just don't forget writing a song like that.
God, no.
So he didn't misremember. So what he was doing was he was dropping a clue. He was saying that, hey, I was there back in 1965.
Wow.
And I wrote the music to In My Life. It's no different than George Martin saying that he wrote the guitar lead for Michelle. Mm-hmm. There's an interview of him saying that that's his composition. A lot of people believe that Paul McCartney wrote that entire song, and George Harrison maybe wrote the guitar lines or the leads to the songs. And and George Martin, in an interview going back many years ago, turns around and says, "Nope, that was me."
Yeah.
Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is all of this stuff about the Beatles writing all their own stuff and all that. I mean, it's dropping clues to let you know that the official narrative has some holes and some gaps in it. So in any case, going back to Billy and In My Life, there you go. He's telling us, hey, back in 1965 when the song was released, really what he was saying is the instrumental aspects of the song, that was his composition. He wrote it. So I believe, he goes back to 62. So when we take a look at the Beatles Yesterday and Today album, what that album is telling us, in my opinion, is that it's setting the stage. It's kind of a prequel to what's going to happen. Now, did Paul McCartney know that his runway was really short at this point in time? No, I don't think he knew. But the album cover itself, I think, is telling us. So if we take a look at the songs, Yesterday, the whole song Yesterday is like his eulogy. Then it goes to Dr. Robert. So now we're getting into Dr. Robert. We're getting into drugs. the drug culture. So that's being introduced. And when we think about it, Billy was responsible for the Beatles making the switch from the boy band from the 1962 to 66 period to the psychedelic period.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of table setting for Billy in the psychedelic era of Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only sleeping. Okay. If you're not here anymore and you have passed away, you are sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And Your Bird Can Sing. You know, the lyrics to And Your Bird Can Sing are very interesting. It talks about, so you think you have everything. And so the way I interpreted the song with regard to the Paul is dead conspiracy is that Billy's stepping in. And it's almost like, hey, be careful what you wish for, because this is going to be a rough road.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Also, the Beatles, this was mentioned in another interview I did with Charles Moskowitz going back about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The Beatles have a number of songs with the word bird in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you take a look at Aleister Crowley and you look at the OTO, that's his esoteric secret society that he ran. It's called a layman, and the layman has symbols on it, and it has at the top, it's the all-seeing eye, the Egyptian all-seeing eye, the eye of Horus, the eye of Ra. Then it's got a dove, and then below it there's like a chalice, and it's the rose and the cross, which I'm thinking goes back to the Rosicrucians. But what I was most focused on was the dove, the bird in the middle. And so I thought to myself, well, And Your Bird Can Sing could have two meanings. One is that, hey, be careful what you ask for. And the second thing could be that his ties back to Crowley,
Mm-hmm.
back to Crowley's religion of Thelema and his society of the OTO. Okay, so I know that's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but that's why I think it's possible that And Your Bird Can Sing was placed on the album. Oh, by the way, we're told in the official narrative that the guitar leads in that song, which is a double guitar lead,
Mm-hmm.
that was just whipped up in the studio and played by George Harrison and Paul McCartney. Okay, so that's another very far-fetched story, because that is not an easy guitar riff to play, and it's being played in unison, whether they're playing together or even if it's being double tracked, done by one person tracked, then a second person comes in, tracks over it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So trust me, that wasn't Paul McCartney and George Harrison whipping that up in the studio on the spot.
Yeah.
That just didn't happen. We can work it out. Life is very short.
Mm-hmm.
So here is another song which is telling us that there's challenges and difficulties. Day Tripper, one-way ticket, yeah. Okay, one-way ticket. So one-way ticket, Paul out, one-way ticket, Billy in. Nowhere Man. So, talking about the Nowhere Man. Billy comes into the picture, and he's got to figure out a way to assimilate into this band, really coming from, if you look at it, coming from nowhere, because nobody knows publicly who he was.
Right.
Right. So that what goes on, I mean, it's really self-explanatory. What goes on is what's going on here. Drive my car. Well, Paul was, the conspiracy, the prevailing conspiracy says that he was killed in a car crash. If I needed someone, Billy needs the Beatles. So we have this symbiotic relationship now that has to come together in order for the band to continue. And then all he needs to do is act naturally. Okay. I just, whenever I looked at the sequencing of the songs, Vince, I just thought it's telling a story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, folks, I'm just giving you my interpretation. Others will have a different opinion, but, this album is a very important album in my view, as it pertains to the Paul is Dead conspiracy.
Wow. All right, Mike, where do you want to go next?
Well, what I was going to do, Vince, was I was going to go through some of the other early albums to show you some of the occultism around? Just to go through it real quick.
Please,
okay?
no, please do. Please do.
Okay, so the other thing I want to mention about the butcher cover, because some folks may be asking, well, what does it mean? So I had a comment come in. I have a lot of very astute subscribers.
Yes,
A
you
lot
do.
of folks are very knowledgeable in the occult. And one person wrote that the Masonic connection and ritual connected to the impending death of Paul are transparent. Obviously, the butcher cover shows a severed baby's head in Paul's lap. So the conspiracy says that Paul was decapitated in a car crash.
Yeah.
So there's the severed baby's head.
Yeah.
Okay. He's also showing a wristwatch. And the wristwatch, Paul's holding it, Vince has it there, over the baby's head. So this is a reference to time and death, also Kronos, Saturn, or Satan. All right, so this goes back to Luciferianism. And then this person goes on to say,
and you know, it's interesting because let's be honest, Mike. When we look at that, first of all, this is the only watch visible, and this is dead center.
Right.
I mean, this is dead center. Pull up the sleeve and show the watch.
Right, and the baby's head sitting in his lap. It's right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very strange. So this person goes on to say that Paul was probably unaware of all this, but no wonder he was having bad dreams, nightmares. So then I had a note that I made to myself, and because when I looked into the butcher cover and I was taking a look at dismembered body parts can represent mind control or being transformed into a different kind of being. This is kind of strange. So this would be the connection to the departed biological Paul McCartney and Billy still in the physical realm. And when you read memoirs, Billy talks about this spiritual connection that he has with Paul, that in essence his physical existence possesses two spirits, that of Paul McCartney and that of himself. And actually Billy depicts this on the album cover of his McCartney 2 album, where he has his face center and then there's two shadows, one to his left and one to his right.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, folks, that this is very, very, very esoteric and probably very weird for a lot of people. And it was very esoteric and very weird for me as well, before I got into this stuff. And as I started digging into it, you're able to kind of bring the pieces of the puzzle together. The other problem with this cover, and I'm going to put this out there, is that baby parts are associated with ritual abuse. Okay, so trauma-based mind control programs and ritual abuse. So is that what they're also putting out there, depicting? I don't know. It could be. We talked about the bird cages. Well, a bird cage is Illuminati symbolism for mind control, to be a mind control slave. And we have images of Paul and George specifically with bird cages on their heads. Mm-hmm. This is not hard to find. All you need to do is do a search in Google. And I have other images of John with his head next to a bird cage, and he's in a Superman shirt. And the Superman shirt goes back to the concept of becoming a god. Crowley saying, every man and woman is a star. There is no God other than man. So the Superman shirt represents, it's referred to in German as the Übermensch, the superhuman. Mm-hmm. So that's what's being depicted there. So what they're doing is they are communicating out. And many times who they're communicating to is not the masses, because they consider us profane. They know 99.9% of the population is not going to understand anything. Many times they're communicating between each other, mm-hmm. within the secret societies. This esoteric communication goes on. Okay, so butcher cover, like I said, very disturbing. The Beatles' first album, which seems very, very straightforward, very innocuous, but the thing is, the Beatles are looking down at us. So what's being depicted here, as an example, the Beatles, the numerology for the Beatles is the number 10. So in numerology, the number 10 represents new beginnings. So what's being depicted here is the Beatles are going to change things. There's going to be a transformative process that's going to take place. There's going to be social engineering, and social scientists are going to reshape the society and the culture. Photo was taken at the EMI building. EMI has numerology of 9, just like number 9 on the White Album.
Mm-hmm.
The number 9 is all around the Beatles. Number 9 refers to endings, changes, transformation. So they have the picture taken at the EMI building, the number 9, endings, and then the Beatles at the top of the album cover in yellow with numerology of 10. So we're leaving the old and we're coming in with the new. And the Beatles are looking down. And we can see if we go up, right? It's going up. This is in reference to illumination and enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, follow us up to illumination and enlightenment. And in fact, in my 2020 presentation, Did the Beatles Write All the Wrong Music? There was a clip I had from Derek Taylor, who was their press secretary. And Derek was on a talk show and he was talking about wanting to be in the light, being illuminated, and that's why he was connected into the Beatles. So the Beatles are all about illumination and enlightenment, but it's a Luciferian take on enlightenment and illumination. And just so folks know, because a lot of times people think that I'm coming at this from a Christian perspective. I'm not Christian. I was born and raised a Catholic. I spent some time in Christian church many years ago, but I'm a long-time deist. Okay, so I just want to put that out there because I don't want people to misinterpret that, that I'm on one side or the other side. I'm just researching and reporting. Okay, then we have the Beatles' second album, which was released. Oh, by the way, Please Please Me was released on March 22 of 1963. 322 is the Skull and Bones number from Yale University. Okay, so we have that occultism. That occult aspect, I should say, of the album as well. Then with the Beatles, and I'm going through their UK albums because these are their official releases, not the Capitol. Capitol wasn't their official releases. It was the UK releases off the Parlophone label, which is part of EMI. So here we have the Shadow Effect. We have One-Eyed Symbolism with the Beatles. With the Beatles in the UK was released on March 22nd, 1963. It's the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. March 22nd, 11/22, when you add those numbers together, is 33. 33 is representative of the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Now, what the Beatles did, what EMI did, was to not release this album in the U.S. on November 22nd. They waited, I think, until January of 63 to release the U.S. version, which was Meet the Beatles. This is with the Beatles. Mm-hmm. The reason given in the book as to why they did that was not because they were showing respect for John F. Kennedy. It was because they didn't want record sales to be harmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they thought that event would put a damper on the ability to sell Meet the Beatles in the U.S.
Wow.
A Hard Day's Night. Okay, so in A Hard Day's Night, what we have is, again, we have a lot of the shadow effects. It's black and white. The black and white is representative of duality, the light and the dark. And we can see there's a lot of one-eyed symbolism as well. We have this image here. This is John. This is symbolic of the owl. He's doing the owl symbolism. And the owl in Freemasonry is representative of wisdom, enlightenment. The owl can see through the dark. Mm-hmm. So the owl represents illumination. This is an interesting cover because at first you're like, what the heck is going on with this? It's so nondescript. And this is the Beatles For Sale album cover. This was their fourth album. And but when we take a look at the back, we can see that it's autumn, it's fall. This is in reference to the Egyptian god Atum, who was the creator god in Egypt. The Beatles occultism, a lot of it goes back to the Egyptian mysteries, back to Egyptian mythology of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set. In fact, I'm convinced that the reason why the Beatles albums especially up through Revolver, had 14 tracks is because in Egyptian mythology, when Set kills his brother Osiris, he chops him up into 14 pieces.
Wow.
Okay. But Hard Day's Night has 13 tracks. And I also believe that is tied into the very same mythology, because when Osiris is dismembered, his wife, Isis, puts him back together again. And when she does this, she's able to find 13 parts, not the 14th. So A Hard Day's Night has 13 songs on it, but all the others have 14. Okay, and also 14 can be derived 7 plus 7 or 77. That goes back to Crowley's book 77. And Crowley's book 77 talks about applying one's will. So pursuing a true, pure will. So there's a lot of occultism, like I said, within the Beatles. It has to do with a lot of it has to do with numerology. Why are numbers important? A lot of people say to me, I don't believe in the numbers. The numbers are just nonsense stuff. But in occultism, numbers are important because occultists believe that numbers have a certain vibrational characteristics. And when you play into those vibrational states, you can actually manifest your goals and objectives. And this is why they're so keen on numbers, and astrology as well, because astrology is viewed as divination, being able to foretell, to look into the future.
Mike, when you look at, and we're going to get into this because I firmly believe this is alive and well today. When you look at Tavistock,
yeah,
and you look at the occult, is there a marriage there, or are we talking about two totally separate, different things?
No, it's one and the same. It's one and the same. In fact, if folks, I recommend you read this book as a primer to Tavistock, and it's a book by Daniel S. Gillen. The book's been out about 14, 15 years now. Social Engineering the Masses. It's very clear that these organizations like Tavistock, and when we talk about these organizations, these are internationalists organizations. This is the shadow government. This is the deep state. This is the government behind the scenes. The government that you interact with, or you think you're interacting with every day, with presidents and prime ministers and senators and House of Representatives and stuff like that, that's a puppet show. Okay, the real power is behind the curtain. And the real power are occultists. I tell my audience all the time that the controllers are occultists. And once you understand this, even if you have a basic understanding of some of the occult symbolism, you will see it over and over and over again. My wife and I were just talking about this morning. It's pattern recognition. It's patterned everywhere. Mm-hmm. We saw it with the March 2020 event. I won't say it here because I don't want the video to be bounced off of YouTube. But it's the same thing there. There was all kinds of occultism and numerology built into that event. So it's really, they are intertwined, Vince. It's part of their MO, occultism. So you really can't separate it out. You really can't. And another book that you folks could read is this one here by Dr. John Coleman. It's the Committee of 300.
Yeah.
And Dr. Coleman gets into the Committee of 300. Tavistock reports into the committee. And he also gets into the entire deep state organizational chart, the structure of who's plugged into who. So it's we'll talk more about Tavistock. Let me just run through these albums real quick. Wow. Then we have this here, the album cover, the Help album cover. And we were told way back when that the Beatles were using semaphore signals and they were spelling out help. Well, they're not doing that at all. In fact, those signals that they are displaying don't even come close to the word help. What are these symbols? These are Aleister Crowley ritual symbols. and it goes back to Egypt. And I covered this in one of my videos as well. But this album cover is extremely occulted. Rubber Soul. Well, Rubber Soul, you can see that it's distorted. The actual image of the Beatles themselves is slightly distorted. Rubber Soul itself. It's actually what Rubber Soul, my interpretation of it is that it is the manipulation of consciousness. It's the manipulation of your soul. Again, as I talked earlier with the social engineering, these social scientists, they want to reshape your thoughts. They want to reshape your morals, your ethics, your beliefs, and take you down a completely different road. So you have a rubber soul, something that is pliable, something that you can shape. Last but not least, so the Revolver album has got a lot going on here. Okay, so I'm not going to focus on the front of the album cover. We'll let folks, take a look at that. But Revolver itself is referring to Paul McCartney, biological Paul, revolving out, and Billy revolving in. But more importantly is the back cover. So we have the Beatles. They're all wearing sunglasses. It's very bright in that room. And what are they telling us? They're talking about, or what they're depicting is illumination, enlightenment, the light bearer, Lucifer. And we can even see over John's head, they've got this, what appears to be a light. And again, a very interesting back cover. So whenever they were putting the covers together, we didn't give it much thought. I didn't give it much thought. But as I got into this research and I started taking a look at what they were putting out, and I was able to apply the occulted research that I was coming across and putting the pieces together on, I was able to, start stitching things together. So in any case, the reason why I wanted to take you through that is because you in the audience, Vince, is because it's not just a Butcher album.
Right. No, not at all.
Not just a Butcher album.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else did you want to discuss?
Well, Mike, here's there's so much I want to discuss with you, bro. But when we go back to Tavistock, listen, guys, go back to the four lads from Liverpool. There's footage. There's recordings. We know the cavern. Bro, they were a run-of-the-mill boy band. They were really not that good. They were average at best. Now, Mike, you do not know this, but this is the connection that I make. I got a friend in the wrestling business who is a wrestler. His name is Jeff Jarrett. Jeff lives in Hendersonville, Tennessee.
Okay.
Jeff's wife passed away. Well, there was a unknown singer at the time that befriended Jeff's three little girls. Three little girls were left without a mother. And this struggling star in Hendersonville, Tennessee, befriended these three girls. Went to the girls' house, made cookies with them, spent time with them because their mother passed away, put them in one of her early music videos. That girl is now Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. And I have said this a million times, and I'm going to go one step further after I hit Taylor Swift. Bro, there are 100 Taylor Swifts out there. There are 100 women that look like Taylor Swift, that write songs, that probably sing better than Taylor Swift. Hundreds upon hundreds. Why Taylor Swift? And I got to tell you, Mike, I was blown away. I was blown away last weekend, man, because one of the latest crazes is a dude by the name of Bad Bunny. And Bad Bunny, 25 billion followers on social media, this, that, and the other thing. Mike, I know who Bad Bunny is. Never listen to Bad Bunny music. So on this past week's SNL, Bad Bunny performed 2 songs. So I'm like, I've got to see this Bad Bunny craze. Meanwhile, the audience is going nuts, yelling, screaming, the whole 9 yards. This dude delivers 2 songs, Mike, and he absolutely sucks. Like, sucks, bro. Like, literally, if one of his songs came on my car radio, I would go to another channel. But yet, this dude is larger than life. And it's, again, you try to explain to people, bro, there are a billion Bad Bunnies out there. There are a billion Bad Bunnies that are better. There are a billion Beyoncés out there that are better. Why them? And man, as I look at this now, and man, I'm no doubt in my mind it was before the Beatles. And maybe you can give me a little history with Tavistock and was it Sinatra? I mean, I don't know. But, there's a common thread here, bro, especially when it comes to music, pop culture, entertainment, getting to the youth. If you can control that and get your message across, to me, it's a no-brainer. It goes back to George Martin's comment when he first saw the Beatles. I was not that impressed, but what was he looking for? What was he looking for? He was looking for somebody to play the part. I can work with them. Now, I mean, Mike, I swear, I'm going to get all these comments about how crazy I am. But somebody has to explain to me why the Beatles, why Taylor Swift, why Bad Bunny? Because there's no doubt in my mind, even like I said, man, the applause and the hooting and the hollering that Bad Bunny got, there's no question in my mind. They planted those people in the audience to do that. There is absolutely no question. Mike, am I nuts? Please tell my people I'm not nuts.
No, you're not nuts. What you have to understand, folks, is that the music and entertainment industry is completely controlled. And it is a gigantic tool in the toolbox of the controllers. Now, who are the controllers? I mean, the Illuminati, whatever label you want to give them. It's the shadow government. It's the deep state. Okay. And if you don't think that these entities exist, then I don't know what to tell you, because it should be very, very apparent, especially over the last 3 years, going back to the March 2020 event, that was a highly coordinated worldwide event where everybody was reading from the same script and implementing the exact same process worldwide. And so, I mean, folks who don't believe that will have to, at some point, they'll have to do their own research and figure out that what we're talking about here, I mean, this is how the world works. So let me just say one thing. I sent Vince an email going back about a week ago, and I said, we have to look at the etymology of the word entertain. And so entertain, the etymology is to keep up, maintain, to keep someone in a certain frame of mind. In other words, to control your mind, to keep you in a box, to keep you controlled. So if I go back to, let me just pull out a piece of paper I have here. It's a summary of Tavistock. So Tavistock, this is a slide I had in one of my presentations, okay? It's called The Hidden Face. And the reason why I call it The Hidden Face is because if you go on Tavistock's site, it's like motherhood and apple pie. But Tavistock is really the world's center for mass mind manipulation and social engineering activities. It's a sophisticated organization used to shape the destiny of the world by changing the paradigm of modern society. So in other words, they're into social engineering, changing things. They have control mechanisms in academia, your colleges, your universities, your schools. They control the Department of Education, through all of their attachments to other organizations. So you have to understand this is like a big octopus. This international structure, it's all interconnected. Multimedia, intelligence, the intelligence agencies, we talk about the CIA, we talk about MI6, we talk about the FBI, MI5, the Mossad, all of this stuff is tied in. Medicine, pharmaceutical companies, and drugs. Okay, so the drug business comes in under, Tavistock, the CIA, like I said, because they're all connected at the hip. Tavistock was heavily funded and involved with the Rockefeller Foundation as well. Just so if anybody wants a U.S. tie to Tavistock, take a look at the Rockefellers. So their range of disciplines include anthropology, economics, organizational behavior. So in other words, a corporate mindset, as an example, political science, psychoanalysis, psychology, and sociology. So Tavistock was a follow-on from what was referred to as Wellington House, Department of Propaganda for the British military going back to World War I. So when World War I ended in 1918, in 1920, the Tavistock Clinic was created. Now, the Tavistock Clinic, if you go into their website, you go back into their history, they say that it was created so that they could help soldiers from World War I who were suffering from trauma, from being shell-shocked. So what they're really saying is we're getting into the business of really understanding human psychology is what they're saying. Then in 1947, it became the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. But in that whole time, Tavistock is involved in understanding the human mind, how to manipulate the human mind, how to social engineer. And this is done through people that are known as social scientists, people that understand how the mind works. And as I mentioned, their reach is far and wide. And over time, when you're talking about, if they were founded as the Tavistock Clinic in 1920, that's 100 years. A century has gone by in which they are a primary force in social engineering. Okay, so that's what we have to understand. And they are very much into the occult. And as I mentioned before, you read Daniel Estulin's book, you'll get that in spades. You'll understand that a lot of occultism is brought into how they go about their business. So when we talk about, Taylor Swift, and we'll get into Bad Bunny in a moment.
Mike, I got to show you something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
What did you say about being in a box?
Oh, I said they want to keep you. They want to keep humanity in a box. They want to keep you contained. They don't want you going outside. There you go, inside
Look
a
at
box.
that. I mean, seriously, like, how do you just take that picture?
Right.
I'd love to know what the 2 million means, though.
I don't know.
Very interesting, though.
But your head being in a box is the same thing as saying that you got your head in a bird cage.
Yeah.
You're captured. Your mind is captured.
Yeah. Look at him. I kind of wanted to interrupt.
No, it's okay. So, when I did the Beatle research, and going back to your point, Vince, the Beatles weren't very good at all. I mean, when they went to Hamburg in August of 1960, they were marginal at best as musicians, and they showed absolutely no signs of songwriting. Okay, but we'll leave that for another day. I'll leave the link to my presentations on their music, and you'll have a much better understanding of how they evolved, and it wasn't organically. Okay, but once you go through the Beatles and you understand how that inorganic, unnatural process took place to put them on a trajectory, to take them from being absolutely, nondescript, group of guys that were banging a drum and playing guitars to worldwide phenomenal status by the time they landed in the U.S. in February of 1964. I mean, when you take a look at that trajectory, it was only 3.5 years. How does that happen? How does that happen? It's not natural. So when I don't follow Taylor Swift. I mean, I know who she is, okay, but I don't listen to her music and all that stuff. I've seen videos that have to do with her stage presentations and all of the occult symbolism that she's flashing, or what that's flashing across the screen in those video presentations.
Mike, do you know? I don't know if you know this or not, but there was a phenomenon when she was on this era tour. Mike, they would interview people after the show.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about people in their 20s. I'm talking about mothers. I'm talking about adults. Bro, there were a large percentage of people that couldn't recall the show.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm not talking about just one. There were a number of people, not 13-year-olds, adults that didn't remember what they just saw. Can you please explain that to people?
Trance state. So what happens is these presentations that take place on stage, what happens is, there's a certain cadence to the music. Also, music has frequencies. And one of the things that is used in the military industrial complex is frequency to affect the person's mind or even to affect their body. Okay. So George Martin was really very well versed in the effect that frequency, in this case, the frequency of music, had on the listener. And that's why, myself included, when I would listen to Sgt. Pepper, the music was colorful. In fact, I used to explain to people that I used to love psychedelic music because it just gave me a sense of color all around me. Now, not everybody's going to get these types of experiences. So in any case, the point being is frequency plays a big part. But the other thing, folks, is the lighting. So if there's a lot of flickering of lights, the way the lights are positioned, strobe lighting, that's going to put people into a trance state. And when you take a combination of all that stuff, there are going to be those people, that segment of the audience that's going to trance out. It's like, Vince knows this. I was a certified master hypnotherapist. I was board certified with the International Association of Counselors and Therapists, and I was in private practice for 12 years. And whenever I brought my clients in and we were doing sessions, let's just say I was doing a particular session and it was 2 hours. And after they came out of the session, they emerged. I would say, how long did that session seem to you? They would say, 20 or 30 minutes. It was 2 hours. So there was time distortion. There was just, they lost a sense of time. And this is what I believe is taking place in some of these concerts. So that's what's going on there. So there's this hypnotic approach to these shows. And why are they doing that? Because once they get you in trance, then the message or whatever words are being sung, those become the hypnotic suggestions. What we refer to as post-hypnotic suggestions. The reason why we say post-hypnotic means these suggestions leave with you after the session, post the session. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, in my case, I was using hypnosis to help people, to help them lose weight, stop drinking, stop smoking, stop vaping, be a better public speaker, have more confidence and stuff like that. But like everything else, I mean, there's an upside, there's a downside to stuff. And these people are very, very, very good at what they do as far as understanding the human mind, the psychiatry and the psychology of the mind, and putting people into trance state and hypnosis. Now, when I looked at Taylor Swift's Wikipedia page, I just couldn't believe it. Okay. It was like, first of all, it was like about a mile long. And we have to remember that this girl is 34 years old, folks. She's only 34 years old. So what I wrote is immediately they talk about pop culture. So what is pop culture? Pop culture is a culture that is spoon-fed to you out of your television set and the media. It's a culture, it's superficial. It's music videos, it's pop music, it's TV, it's Hollywood, it's movies, it's Netflix, it's hamburgers, okay? That's pop culture. Your true culture would be your roots back to your ancestry and the traditions of your ancestors. And so what they do is they want to erase all of that. They don't want you to have a connection back to your past and back to your family and back to ancestral traditions. They don't want that, because those types of values, they're very difficult to break. And this is an impediment to them to move forward to where they want to go. This whole hive mind, one world government, one religion, right? Which I believe they want to have in place by the 21st century. But that's a story for another day. So, Taylor Swift is what they refer to is as a social influencer, which means she's shaping culture. She's there to shape culture. Another way of saying that is it's social engineering. Tavistock would call it social engineering. So social influencer, shaping culture, social engineering are all the same thing. It's the celebrity culture, right? So, in fact, they call her followers Swifties. It's a cult, okay? So Tavistock is in the business also of creating cults. You have a leader, a cult leader, in this case, a person like Taylor Swift or the Beatles, and they have their legions of followers, fans, okay? It's all about celebrity worship. So that people worship celebrities. So my advice to folks is if you haven't watched this series, it's called American Gods. It was 3 seasons. American Gods explains how technology is the new God. And what they're doing is, I talked earlier about how they capture your thoughts. They capture your consciousness. It's really your non-physical energy because your thoughts create. Nothing around you, take a look at anything around you, wouldn't be here if it wasn't a thought at first. So they want to steer your thoughts so they can manufacture their version of their reality. Mm-hmm. Because what Luciferians do is Crowley teaches, do as thou wilt shall be the law, love under will. So what he's saying is pursue your true, pure will. And so what Luciferians do is they invest in what it is they want to pursue, what they want to be, how they want to manifest their lives. And then they create an external world that mirrors their internal world. Okay, so that's what they focus on, mastering their what they call their true or pure will, and then creating an external world that mirrors it. What do most people do? 99.99% of the population. They do the absolute opposite. They take the external world and they bring it into their internal being. Mm-hmm. So they don't have their own internal will. You have embraced the will of an external world that was created by the controllers. And this is what many, many people have a hard time understanding. And so what they put out there for you, for everybody, is what's referred to back in Rome. It was called bread and circuses. Feed them, they'll be happy. Circuses, give them games, give them entertainment, keep them occupied with food and just inane stuff, and that will distract them. And while they're distracted, we're going to go do our thing over here, and we're going to reshape the world and society and the culture the way we want the world to look. That's how it works, okay? So when I looked at, let me just go through Taylor Swift real quick, because I'm going to tell you right now, there's nothing organic about Taylor's trajectory, in my opinion. It's the same thing. It's the same model that applies to the Beatles.
If you went from the Paul is Dead channel to the Taylor Swift channel, I am 1,000% convinced you would be telling us a very similar story.
Yeah, so let me just go through a couple of things here real quick, Vince. So I took a look at Taylor Swift. And so she was born on December 13th, 1989 from West Reading, Pennsylvania. She's 34 years old currently. The write-up says that she is a tremendous influence on the music industry, and she is a prominent cultural figure of the 21st century. So you have to pay attention to the words that they use. She is a prominent cultural figure in the 21st century, which means she's shaping culture. It says that she began her professional songwriting at age 14. Do I believe that? A 14-year-old? Not really. She has sold over 200 million records globally. Now, you don't sell that volume of records unless you have a tremendous machine behind you. Back in the 1950s, you couldn't even get a song on the radio unless you paid payola. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All of the music that is on the charts today, that are just banging it on Spotify, this is all predetermined. Artists are placed where the controlling apparatus wants to place them so that they can continue to do their social engineering. She's the only act to have 5 albums with first week sales of over 1 million copies in the US. She has been featured in lists such as Rolling Stone's 100 greatest songwriters of all time, Billboard's greatest of all time artists, the Time 100, and Forbes Celebrity 100. Now remember, folks, she's 34 years old. And to be 34 years old and to be considered in Rolling Stone magazine's 100 greatest songwriters of all time, you have to ask yourself, how is this happening? It's happening because it's all fabricated. It's all manufactured. It's all orchestrated. Her accolades include 12 Grammy Awards, a Primetime Emmy Award, 40 American Music Awards, 29 Billboard Music Awards, 23 MTV Music Awards, 3 IFPI Global Recording Artists of the Year Awards, and 101 Guinness World Records. Okay, so now here's the thing. I'm going to get to something else here. Now, the Christian audience, okay? You have to pay very close attention to this, because one of the things that the Illuminati did back, the controllers did back in 1962, was to declare war on your faith. So Taylor Swift, in her Wikipedia page, says she's a Christian. Now, this is a tactic that's used very often. The controllers are looking to dismantle Christianity. Why is that? Because it's in the way of their new religion, which is pagan-based. It's Luciferianism. You can't have Luciferianism. You can't have a pagan-based religion if you've got Christianity in the way. So they put these artists up there, and they say they're Christian. So what happens is then the Christian youth plug into them because they believe what they're doing is they're following a Christian. Right? But it's a tactic. Okay? And now what's going to happen is it's the Pied Piper approach, right? I call the Beatles the Pied Pipers of the age of Aquarius, of Crowley's Aeon of Horus. Well, Taylor Swift's doing the same thing, right? She's leading you down a path that's not going to look anything like Christianity at all. At all. All you have to do is watch some of her videos and take a look at the occult symbolism that's there. So when she was around 12 years old, a computer repairman and local musician taught her to play guitar. Okay, so this computer repairman comes in, hey, I'm going to teach you how to play guitar at 12 years old. In Nashville between 2004 and 2008, so now in 2004, she was 15 years old, Swift worked with experienced Music Row songwriters. So Music Row songwriters are the songwriters that are out of Memphis. Yeah. Okay. Troy Vergas, Brett Beavers, Brett James, Mac McAnally, and the Warren brothers. And she formed a lasting working relationship with Liz Rose. Now, how does a 15-year-old kid foster those connections unless she was on the radar and connected in some kind of program going back many, many years ago, all right, back when she was a kid. She's still a kid at 14 or 15. I'm talking about when she was like a young kid. Various pop and rock artists have also influenced Swift. She lists Paul McCartney. Now, this is something that a lot of bands, a lot of artists do. They will refer back to the Beatles or Paul McCartney. And why is that? Because the Beatles are foundational to all the genres of music that came after them. Think of the Beatles as the foundation of that house that they're building. So they're paying homage to the Beatles and to, quote, Paul McCartney, which of course is Billy these days, right? That's what they're doing. She's described as a music chameleon. That's because she started off in country. And the reason why she started off in country is because that's another thing that they needed to do. They needed to take the mindset of the country music fan, which is rural for the most part, guns for the most part, Christians for the most part, right? And now they need to reshape them. They need to transform them and move them over to a different mindset. And I mentioned that she was referred to as one of the greatest songwriters of all time by several publications. This is in Wikipedia. I'm not making this up, all right? This is for the audience. Now, it goes on to say that Swift has made a profound impact on the music industry, popular culture, I just explained pop culture, the economy and beyond. She dominates cultural conversations, and hence publications describe her as a cultural vitality or zeitgeist What's a zeitgeist? A zeitgeist is a movement. They're describing Taylor Swift as a movement. New York Magazine's Jody Rosen dubbed Swift the world's biggest pop star and opined that the trajectory of her stardom has defied established patterns. Of course, it's defied established patterns because she's a manufactured entity. That's why. According to publications, they don't say which ones, Swift changed the music landscape forever. And her ability to popularize any sound in mainstream music is one of her strong points. So she's moved from different genres of music. Started with country, and then she moved into rock. I think she did some techno and stuff like that. So what they're doing is they're moving her into different genres, different spaces, so that she can take the influence that she has with her followers, the Swifties, right? And they can affect different aspects of music or different listening experiences. Different groups of people, different segments of the population. Swift's music, life, and image are points of attention in global celebrity culture. So we're back to celebrity culture. We're back to pop culture. Senior artists such as Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Madonna, okay, and Dolly Parton have praised her musicianship. Carole King regards Swift her professional granddaughter. And thanked Swift for carrying the torch forward. While Ringo Starr, listen to this now, Vince. Now, while Ringo Starr and Billy Joel considered Swift the Beatles' successor. That's in the Wikipedia page. So she identifies as a pro-choice feminist. She advocates for LGBTQ rights. Swift's net worth is $740 million. She's 34 years old. So the reason why I mentioned pro-choice and LGBT is because these are part of the agendas that are in play right now.
Well,
okay?
let me add to that, Mike, because this is this blew my mind, Mike. Like usually when there's a celebrity romance, the paparazzi are catching them, that goes on for a couple of months and then they go out in public. That's usually the way it's done.
Right.
Well, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift came out of nowhere. Right. There was no courtship. There was no nothing. Now, when you break that down, something very interesting happened, and I'm just piggybacking off of what you are saying. Taylor Swift is not political. She is not the no jab girl because she doesn't want to divide her audience. So when it comes to stuff like that, she doesn't go anywhere near it. Well, all of a sudden, this famous football player, Travis Kelce, comes out with a series of commercials of get the vax. Yeah. Get the vax.
Right.
Next thing we know, he's dating Taylor Swift. Now, Taylor Swift, who won't come forward and say either way, get the facts or don't get the facts, she not only is endorsing, she is dating somebody at the same time they're saying. Meanwhile, Mike, during the football games on Sunday, when they keep showing her up in the press box, they are playing Travis's commercial, get the facts, back to back with the Eras Tour commercial of Taylor Swift. Back to back.
Right.
And I'm like, how in the world can people not see that?
I know, it's completely manufactured. So with her not talking about the vax, that's because that's scripted for her. She's not going to talk about that because they have her at a certain place to do certain things. And like you said, Vince, then you have Travis Kelce. Well, he's another one. I mean, I did some research on him too. So, I think he's been on the radar as well for quite a while. And so to talk about, their relationship, this is what I found here. The alleged relationship between Kelce and Swift had considerable impact on NFL viewership. Mm-hmm. Money, right?
Just not only money, viewership, merchandise. They had to make a Swiftie jersey.
Right. Right. It says they said with the Chiefs-Bears game drawing the most television viewers of the weekend, Kelsey's jersey sales increased by 400%.
Yep.
And an increase in sales of Chiefs home game tickets were also documented, because I guess the Swifties are going to expect her to be in the booth, right?
Yes. Yes.
So this is, folks, what this is celebrity culture. And when you're in celebrity culture, you're worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
You're worshiping these people. And when you worship people, you disempower yourself and you're giving up your own authority. So you have to understand that this is what they're putting together. It's this pop culture. It's this meaningless, inane culture that has no benefit to you, unless you think Netflix and hamburgers and stuff like that is a way of life. And when we talk about football games, I'm not knocking, watching a football game. I was a huge Giants fan back in the day. But when you're too connected into that stuff, when I talked about in Rome, bread and circuses, the circuses part, football is the circuses part, baseball, hockey,
Wrestling,
basketball, that's the circuses part. That's to keep you distracted. That's to keep you over there in that corner as much as they possibly can, so that you're not taking a look someplace else at things that are far more important, that are going to impact your life. Don't look over there, because what we're doing over here legislatively with laws and stuff like that, we don't want you to know about that stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to pass that stuff in the middle of the night over a Christmas vacation or whatever. So you just pay attention to your television set over here. Just to wrap her up, again, folks, she's 34 years old. 10 studio albums, 4 re-recorded albums, 6 films, 7 concert/documentary films, and 6 live performances. Okay? That's a lot. That is a lot. And so, like I said, this is the same model that you see all the time. Once you see the patterns, once you see how this is all put together, there's a story. It's a narrative. And these stories are put out there. I've said that official narratives, which are official stories, that's what makes the world go round. Mm-hmm. Because that's what you're reading in the newspaper. That's what you're reading online. That's what you're listening to on your television set, is official narratives. Are they true? In most cases, no. Okay. There's a lot of lack of truthfulness in a lot of those stories and what you're fed, but you don't know any better because you trust it. Mm-hmm. So in any case, all right. So I don't want to bang on here about with Taylor Swift, but it's clear that, she's an engineered, manufactured person.
Yeah, much like Bad Bunny, that reaches a whole other different demographic.
I took a look at him, 46 million viewers, subscribers, I should say, or followers on Instagram. 46 million? I also read that he did some wrestling or something.
Yeah. Mike. Oh, Mike, I could talk to you all day, man. It's always such a great conversation with you, man.
I don't know, Vince. I don't even know how I got into all this, to be honest with you. Sometimes I listen to myself and I think, you know what? I need to take a break. And I do take a break every once in a while, In fact, I took a break going back about a couple of weeks ago to the end of the year. But whenever, you and I want to get together, then.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because I got a whole, I was like, man, I went into the backmasking rabbit hole the other day. And I'm like, that's a whole other show, man. That is a whole other show.
If you want to listen to some backmasking and it's crystal clear, play Stairway to Heaven backwards.
Yeah.
And Robert Plant is singing about Sweet Satan.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up. In fact, you can find the backmasking on YouTube. A lot of people have pulled that one up. And like I said, that's not one of those backmasking examples that you have to kind of is he really saying that? It's pretty clear.
Yeah, no, that was part of the documentary. All right, Mike, listen, I know you are at sageofquay.com.
I am.
The Paul is Dead channel.
Yep.
I want to know, how can they listen to your music? That's what I want to know. Can we drive people to your music?
Yeah, so just go to my hub website, sageofquay.com, and there's a whole section there that will take you to my music. So you can go to my actual music website, which is laboroflovemusic.com, or you can click the Reverb Nation link or the SoundCloud link, and that'll take you to my music. I have 3 albums out. I released No More Gods in May of this year, so it's pretty recent. And I just released a new single, I Want to Fly, yesterday. So that's up on my Reverb Nation SoundCloud web pages as well.
Now, if we play that backwards, will I find anything in that record, Mike?
I hope not. I mean, I didn't intend to do any backmasking, but you know, that would be an interesting little exercise to do, you know, to see if there's anything.
And listen, since Mike has all this wisdom and all this knowledge, the next time I have Mike back, he is going to have 20 platinum albums. He is going to be worth $590 billion. Yeah, Mike, of all people to shut up, give Mike a deal like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. You know why, Vince? Because first of all, to take that deal, you got to play in their sandbox.
No way, man.
No way,
Absolutely
man.
not.
No way.
Absolutely not. All right, everybody. Mike, I'm going to hit you up after the first of the year, man, because we just scratched the surface here today.
Anytime, Vince. It was really enjoyable.
I love talking to you, man. All right, everybody. The great Mike Williams, Sage of Quay. Paul is Dead channel. Check out his music. We'll see you here next time on Glass Onions.